Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal M. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. The first story tonight comes from someone who was working alone in his recording room when he suddenly heard a small child laughing nearby. There was no child in the house, and he couldn't work out where the sound was coming from. A few days later, he received some sad family news that made him think back to that moment. Anyway, get comfortable, and I hope you all sleep well tonight. This happened about 27 years ago, when I was living alone in a townhouse-style condo. An older woman named Mrs. Ellman lived in the unit below me. She was quiet, kept to herself, and I rarely saw anyone visit her. My place took up the 3 floors above hers, and the units were completely separate. My bedroom and small recording setup were on the top floor. The neighbors on either side usually worked during the day, and neither household had children. One afternoon, I was working on some music when I suddenly heard a child laugh. It sounded close. Not downstairs, not outside, not through the wall. It sounded like the child was standing somewhere in the room with me. But I lived alone. I didn't have any pets, and there was no television or radio playing. The laugh itself was cheerful, just a quick burst of genuine laughter. The strange thing was the volume. It wasn't muffled or whispered. It was more like someone had recorded a loud laugh and then played it back quietly. There was a small playground outside the building, about 4 floors below my window. When the window was open, I could sometimes hear children down there, but those sounds were always distant and blurred together. This didn't sound anything like that. I looked outside anyway. The playground was empty. I checked the room, even though there really wasn't much to check. Nothing was playing. Nothing had fallen or shifted. Eventually, I went back to work. A few minutes later, I heard the laugh again. It wasn't exactly the same laugh, but it sounded like the same child. I stopped the music and listened. Then it happened again. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Every time I tried to focus on a direction, it seemed to come from nowhere in particular. It still sounded close, almost as though the sound itself was inside the room. I checked the playground again. Still empty. This continued for nearly an hour. Sometimes I heard it while the music was playing. Other times, I heard it when the room was completely silent. After a while, I stopped trying to understand it. The child didn't sound frightened or upset. The laughter sounded happy, so I just carried on with my work. Eventually, it stopped. I didn't even notice right away. A few days later, my cousin called me. She told me that another cousin of ours had lost his 6-year-old son. That cousin had briefly lived with my family when I was young, before moving back to his home country. He later married and had several children. I asked when his son had died. After the call, I worked out the time difference. They lived on the other side of the world. It was the same day I had heard the laughter. Then I remembered something my parents had told me after visiting relatives there. They had met the little boy. They described him as bright, polite, and playful, but said he had a serious heart condition. Apparently, they had told him about me. He had said he hoped he could meet me someday. I've never really believed in ghosts or anything like that. My cousin, though, believed the boy had come to visit me before he left. I lived in that condo for almost 10 years. I never heard anything like it before that day, and I never heard it again. To this day, I still don't know what it was. I used to call him the man in shadow. He was always dressed in black, but not ordinary black. It was deeper than that, almost as though the darkness around him was being pulled into his clothes. I could never see his eyes. There was no glow, no reflection, nothing. Just two empty spaces beneath the brim of his hat. And for some reason, I always felt he carried an old pocket watch. I never actually saw it, but I could picture the long silver chain hanging beneath his coat as clearly as anything else. The whole thing started when I was about 16. My older cousin, a few girls from the neighborhood, and I decided to fool around with a spirit board one evening. We treated it like a game. We laughed, accused one another of moving the pointer, and acted as though none of us believed in it. Later, we started trying to hypnotize each other. One of the girls, Mara, seemed to fall into a trance. Maybe she was pretending. I honestly hoped she was. But while she was under, her whole body went rigid. She said there was a man standing in the hallway. None of us could see anyone. Mara began crying and begging us to wake her up. When she finally opened her eyes, she refused to look toward the hallway again. Not long after that, my cousin's little boy began having trouble at bath time. He had always been independent, but suddenly he refused to bathe alone. He would scream until his mother came into the room. Eventually, he told her that his invisible friend had asked whether he could hold him beneath the water. We never knew whether that invisible friend had anything to do with the man Mara saw. Still, something had changed. A few years passed. By then, I was 19 and had my own car. One evening, my cousin and I drove out to an abandoned farmhouse that had once belonged to our family. Mara had planned to come, but she was still underage and could not get permission. On the drive home, the road was dark and nearly empty. Without warning, a figure appeared directly in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes because I was certain I had hit someone. I felt no impact, heard no sound, but I knew what I had seen. When I turned toward my cousin, she was pale. She whispered, "What did you just hit?" We both looked behind us. There was nobody in the road. The figure had looked exactly like the man in shadow. We did not get out of the car. We kept driving, and I have always believed that if Mara had been with us that night, something much worse would have happened. After that, he seemed to belong to me. I began seeing him in my rearview mirror. I would be driving alone at night, glance upward, and find him sitting silently in the back seat. He never moved. He never spoke. He simply watched from beneath that hat, his face hidden in darkness. It happened several times until I eventually wrecked that car. When I bought another one, I thought the problem was over. I convinced myself that whatever I had been seeing was somehow attached to the old vehicle. Then, one night, while driving home from the city, I looked into the mirror. He was there again. By that point, fear had started turning into anger. I shouted at him, sometimes aloud and sometimes only inside my head. "What do you want? Why are you following me? Why won't you leave me alone?" He never answered. That car was destroyed in an accident too. Years went by. I moved to another state and built a new life. But every so often, usually while driving at night, he would return. I finally told two close friends about him. The worst encounter happened while the three of us were working a job that required a lot of travel. My friends were in one car, and I was driving mine. We were moving through an unfamiliar city, passing each other on the highway and talking over the phone. After losing sight of them for a few minutes, I glanced toward the car beside me. There was a man sitting in the passenger seat. He was not wearing the black coat or the hat, but the moment I saw him, I knew. It was him. The man in shadow, only this time he looked completely human. A wave of dread passed through me so strongly that I could barely breathe. I pressed the accelerator and sped away. I drove recklessly for several miles before realizing I needed to get off the road. I pulled over, called my friends, and broke down crying. I sat there for a long time before my hands stopped shaking enough for me to drive again. That was when I decided I had to do something. Around that period, I had begun studying old spiritual traditions, protective rituals, and simple forms of folk magic. Most of what I practiced was harmless: blessings for a peaceful day, protection from danger, little rituals meant to bring comfort. Eventually, I found a method for banishing an unwanted presence. The idea was simple. The man in shadow belonged to darkness, so I imagined placing him somewhere darkness could not survive. Every night, I closed my eyes and pictured him standing in the middle of a blazing light desert beneath the noon sun. There were no trees, no buildings, and nowhere for a shadow to hide. Then I made him smaller. Night after night, I pictured him shrinking, smaller than a man, smaller than a child, smaller than a coin. I kept him beneath that endless sunlight until he became so tiny that the only darkness available to him was the narrow space beneath a single grain of sand. I left him there. The process took several weeks. That was more than 15 years ago. I have driven countless roads since then, many of them alone and in complete darkness. But I have never seen him again. This happened a long time ago, when I was about 14. My family had gone out for an all-night movie marathon at an old drive-in theater, so I had the house completely to myself. I remember curling up on the living room couch with a horror novel, determined to enjoy the peace and quiet. But I couldn't concentrate. I would read an entire paragraph, reach the end, and realize I hadn't understood a single word. So I'd start again, only for the same thing to happen. It felt as though the meaning disappeared the moment my eyes passed over the page. At first, I was annoyed. Then, for no sensible reason, that annoyance turned into this intense, boiling anger. I wasn't just frustrated with the book. I was furious. My hands were shaking, my face felt hot, and I kept staring at the words as though they had personally betrayed me. I recognized every letter, but my mind refused to make sense of them. That was when our 3 dogs came racing down the hallway. Normally, when my parents were gone, the dogs would spend the whole night asleep on their bed. They rarely bothered with me. But that night, all 3 of them rushed into the living room and scrambled onto the couch. I barely looked up. I assumed they were chasing each other or reacting to some noise outside. Then our oldest dog, Mabel, climbed across my stomach and pressed her entire body against me. She was small, but she held me down with surprising force. A deep growl started in her chest. I got even more irritated. I thought she was growling at the 2 younger dogs, who were trembling behind my head along the back of the couch. Finally, my anger boiled over, and I looked up to see what her problem was. The anger vanished instantly. Mabel wasn't looking at the other dogs. She was staring across the room. Her lips were pulled back, her teeth were exposed, and foam had gathered around her mouth. I had never seen her that frightened before. She wasn't acting territorial or aggressive. She looked terrified, and yet she refused to move away from me. The way she had positioned herself made something very clear. She was protecting me. She was putting her little body between me and whatever she saw, as though she had already decided she would die before she let it come any closer. That was when I noticed how strange the room felt. My entire body tingled as though I had walked through thousands of invisible spiderwebs. The air felt thick and solid, almost like a wall pressing against my chest. I couldn't breathe properly. I couldn't organize my thoughts. I felt tiny, helpless. And then I saw him. He was standing beside the television cabinet, studying the framed family photographs on the wall. One hand rested beneath his chin, and his posture seemed almost exaggerated, as though he were pretending to be deeply interested in them. It felt like he had been waiting for me to notice him, Not hiding, not sneaking, waiting. There was something smug about the way he stood there, as though he knew that nothing in that room could challenge him. It felt like he was enjoying our fear, letting it build before finally acknowledging us. He was darker than any shadow I had ever seen. Not simply black, but so unnaturally dark that the light around him seemed to fade. Somehow, though, I could still make out the shape of his coat, his shoulders, and the wide-brimmed hat on his head. Then he turned toward me. His eyes were red. For a few seconds, he just stared. His shoulders began to tremble slightly, almost as though he were silently laughing. Then he smiled, and I saw his teeth. I remember blinking because the spiderweb sensation had spread across my face and into my eyes. When I opened them, he was gone. The room still felt wrong, as though some part of him had remained behind, but I could breathe again. I could move. The pressure in my head began to lift. The dogs were still terrified. Mabel had stopped growling, but she wouldn't let me stand up. Every time I tried to move, she pressed herself harder against me. The younger dogs stayed curled behind my shoulders, shaking and staring at the empty space beside the television. Eventually, I grabbed my cheap little prepaid phone and started sending message after message to my dad. I didn't tell him what I had seen. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. I just begged them to come home. Thankfully, the movie lineup wasn't as good as they had expected, and my family returned much earlier than planned. Years have passed, and I still don't understand what happened that night. I've never experienced that kind of mental fog again. I've never felt an emotion take over my body so suddenly or completely, and I have never felt that strange spiderweb sensation before or since. Maybe I could have convinced myself it was a panic attack, a medical episode, or some kind of waking hallucination. But the dogs saw something too. That is the part I can never explain away. They were frightened before I even looked up. And Mabel was ready to protect me from something I hadn't yet realized was standing in the room. I need to start by saying this wasn't just some spooky story we made up afterward. Everyone on our creative problem-solving team was there, and every one of them witnessed at least part of what happened. It was the summer of 2001, and our team had traveled to a university in the Midwest for a national competition. I wasn't a student there. We were simply staying in one of the older residence halls for 4 nights. From the moment we arrived, something about that floor felt wrong. On the first evening, the boys were divided between 3 rooms, while the girls had 2 rooms farther down the hall. Sometime after dark, a guy from one of the other rooms suddenly came rushing through our doorway. His face had gone completely pale. He asked whether he could sleep in our room. Naturally, we wanted to know why. He just shook his head and said, "You're not going to believe me. It'll be easier if I show you." So we followed him back to his room. His 2 roommates were sitting at their desks, quietly working on their part of the team project. Nothing looked unusual. Then he placed a pencil on top of the dresser. The pencil began to roll. At first, I laughed. I told him the dresser was probably uneven. The building was ancient after all. But then, the pencil reached the edge and rolled off. It didn't fall. It kept moving through the air. The pencil floated toward me until it stopped just inches from my face. It slowly spun around several times, almost as though someone invisible were inspecting it, and then drifted backward onto the dresser. As it landed, I heard a quiet chuckle somewhere near my ear. There was nobody standing beside me. We immediately told him he could sleep in our room, although he would have to take the floor. Then, all 6 of us ran out of there. The girls told us the next morning that strange things had happened in their rooms too. They were so frightened that they spent the night crowded into another team's room. More incidents followed during our stay, but the strangest one happened to me. That night, I thought I had a dream. In the dream, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. I sat up and put on my black high-top sneakers because there was no chance I was walking barefoot into a shared dorm bathroom. Several guys were asleep on the floor, blocking the easiest path to the door. I didn't want to step over them or wake them, so I took another route. I walked up the wall. I remember it feeling completely natural. I continued across the ceiling until I reached the door. One of the guys was sleeping too close to it, so I reached down from the ceiling, shook his shoulder, and asked him to move over so the door wouldn't hit him. Then, I walked along the ceiling, out into the hallway, and past several dorm rooms. I went all the way to the bathroom, still upside down, used it, and returned the same way. I walked back across the ceiling, down the wall, and into bed. Then, everything went dark. The next thing I remember was hearing voices, as though I were deep underwater. They were distant and muffled at first, but gradually became louder. For a while, all I could see was blackness. Then a faint gray light appeared. Slowly, shapes and colors returned. My roommate was standing in front of me, snapping his fingers beside my ears and waving his hands inches from my face. Everyone in the room was shouting at me. I was sitting perfectly upright in bed. My shoes were on. They told me I had been staring at the empty wall for nearly 10 minutes. I wasn't speaking, blinking, or responding to anything. One of them said, "It didn't even look like I was breathing." They had been seconds away from calling an ambulance because they honestly believed I was dead. Still confused, I began telling them about the dream. I turned and pointed toward the wall. "And then," I said, "I walked up there." That was when we saw them. Footprints. The tread pattern from my sneakers had been burned into the wall beside my bed. The marks continued upward to the ceiling, crossed the room, passed through the doorway, and stretched down the hall toward the bathroom. Then, they came all the way back. They weren't dusty prints or muddy smudges. The rubber pattern looked scorched into the paint, dark and sharp, as though someone had pressed a heated branding iron against every surface I had walked across in the dream. Later that afternoon, one of the university student advisors gave us a tour of the building. We hadn't told him what happened. As we reached our floor, he casually mentioned that students had reported strange activity there for decades. According to him, a student who once lived in that exact room had died after jumping from the window during final exams. People believed his spirit still wandered the hallway, moving objects and frightening anyone who stayed there. The advisor described him as more of a prankster than a violent presence. I wish I could believe that was all it was, but after what happened to me, I've never been convinced that I was simply dreaming. I think something entered me while I slept, and for those 10 missing minutes, I think it was the thing sitting upright in my bed. Honestly, I used to be exactly like that, maybe even more cautious, because back then, the only things I knew about the supernatural were what I had learned through church, and none of it was presented in a comforting way. I'm older now, and I understand a lot more than I did then, but I still don't love the idea of opening myself up to things I don't fully understand. I've always worried that if you invite something in, you might not have the knowledge to control what comes through. The strangest experience I ever had happened when my mom went away for nearly 2 weeks. She had never left the house for that long before, and things started getting strange on the very first night. At the time, my boyfriend was living with us. What my family didn't know was that he had become abusive behind closed doors. My mom had heard us arguing, but she didn't realize how serious it had become. Whatever was in that house, though, seemed to know exactly what kind of person he was. That first night, He suddenly woke me up and whispered, "Something's wrong. There's something in the room watching me." I sat up, still half asleep, and almost immediately, something dropped from the ceiling and landed directly on him. If I had still been lying down, it probably would have hit me too. I switched on the lamp and saw a chunk of plaster and drywall on the bed. The ceiling was old, but nothing had ever fallen from it before. My mom lived in that house for more than 20 years, and it never happened again afterward. He wasn't badly hurt, but dust got into his eyes, and he completely panicked. Before going to sleep, we had both checked the windows and doors several times. My mom had made us promise to keep everything locked while she was gone, so we were unusually careful about it. The next morning, I woke up to the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. It made this loud, squeaking sound because of the weather stripping around it. Right after that, the dogs began barking wildly. Then I heard footsteps moving through the living room. The dogs followed the sound, barking the entire time. I threw on some clothes and hurried downstairs. My bedroom was only a short staircase away, and the house had hardwood floors, so every movement echoed. But when I reached the front door, it was still locked. The dogs were gone from the living room. As I walked through the dining room, I noticed something else. The pull chains from the ceiling fan had somehow been twisted tightly around the base of the fixture. They were too high for the dogs to reach, and neither of us had touched them. Then I stepped into the kitchen. The back door was standing wide open. It led into our fenced backyard, and both dogs were outside. At first, I assumed my brother had come over, because he was the only other person with a key. I called him immediately, but he told me he was several hours away and hadn't been near the house. It was the middle of winter, and the ground was covered in fresh snow. There were no footprints on the front porch. There were no footprints in the backyard. For the rest of my mom's trip, my boyfriend insisted that we sleep with the light on. He started having nightmares and would wake up convinced that someone was touching or pulling at his arms. A few months later, I finally left him. And the strangest part is that once he was gone, everything stopped. I never experienced anything else in that house. The unexplained activity only happened during the year he lived there. At the time, I was terrified and didn't want to think too deeply about what it meant. But now, more than a decade later, I see it differently. Sometimes I wonder whether the house was trying to warn me. Maybe something there recognized the danger before I was ready to admit it. Maybe it wasn't trying to frighten me at all. Maybe it was trying to protect me. I need to tell you about something I witnessed near the docks in Mumbai, because even now, I'm not completely sure how to explain it. There's an old part of the city near Cotton Green Station where everything feels heavy. The buildings are weathered, the air carries the smell of salt and metal, and you can hear machinery groaning in the distance. Hidden among those narrow roads is an open-air dargah where families are said to bring people suffering from spiritual possession. I went there because I was curious. Honestly, I didn't believe most of the stories. I thought I would watch a strange ritual, satisfy my curiosity, and leave with a reasonable explanation. Instead, I left with something that kept me awake for several nights. The courtyard was already overflowing when I arrived. There must have been more than 100 people gathered inside, with families standing close to those who had supposedly been possessed. While I was trying to understand what was happening, I noticed a young woman standing a few feet away from me. She looked completely normal. She was calm, well-dressed, and strangely composed compared with everyone else. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. She simply held my gaze and gave me a soft, almost reassuring smile. For one brief moment, it felt ordinary. Then, the drums began. The first beat was so deep that I felt it inside my ribs. At that exact moment, the woman's expression changed. Her smile disappeared. Her eyes rolled upward, her body stiffened, and she began jerking her head in fast, violent circles. Before I could even react, the entire courtyard erupted. Dozens upon dozens of people started moving at the same time, almost as though one invisible force had pulled every string at once. Bodies twisted, heads swung from side to side. People screamed until their voices no longer sounded human. Some cried out for mercy. "Please, let me go! Don't hurt my hands! Please don't break my legs!" The voices sounded terrified, but they also sounded unfamiliar, deeper and harsher than the people they were coming from. For nearly half an hour, the courtyard became a storm of drums, screams, dust, and violently moving bodies. I stood, frozen. The woman beside me was no longer smiling. She was thrashing, so close that I could hear her breathing between the screams. I wanted to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, the drumming stopped. Not gradually. It ended with one final beat. The entire courtyard fell silent. Almost everyone who had been moving collapsed at once. For several seconds, nobody reacted. Then family members rushed forward, lifting people from the ground, wiping their faces, calling their names, and trying to wake them. One by one, they opened their eyes. They looked confused and completely exhausted, as though they had returned from somewhere very far away. An elderly man standing nearby noticed how shaken I was. He placed a hand on my shoulder and told me not to be afraid. He said his sister had once suffered from the same condition. His family had brought her there 4 times. After the final visit, he claimed that whatever had been tormenting her was gone. "She came back to us," he said quietly, "completely well." I know he meant to comfort me, but as I walked back into the humid Mumbai night, I couldn't stop thinking about the young woman. I kept remembering the way she had looked directly into my eyes, that calm expression, that gentle smile. And one question has stayed with me ever since. When she smiled at me before the drums began, was I looking at an ordinary person who had no idea what was about to happen? Or was something inside her already awake, watching me and patiently waiting for the first beat? I've always felt that experiences like these run in my family. My grandmother had stories. My mother had stories. I've had my own experiences, and now my children have had theirs. Honestly, I could probably fill an entire book with everything that has happened over the years, but the stories involving my kids are the ones that stay with me the most. My oldest daughter was about 3 when the first strange thing happened. One afternoon, she was playing alone in my bedroom. I could hear her talking, so I went to check on her because we were the only 2 people in the house. I assumed she was making up voices for her toys. The moment I walked into the room, she turned to me and said, very seriously, "Jame is scared." I smiled a little and asked, "Why is Jame scared?" Her whole expression changed. She looked genuinely worried. "He fell from a window," she told me. "He got hurt really bad. He has lots of cuts. Can we give him some bandages?" That answer sent a cold feeling straight through me. I asked her where Jame was, and she pointed toward the bathroom beside my bedroom. Then I asked, "Is he a little boy?" She shook her head. "No, he's a grown-up." The way she said it made me feel as though she wasn't imagining a character. It felt like she was describing someone standing right there, someone who had asked her for help. Another time, I brought out a small box of photographs that had belonged to my father. He passed away before my daughter was born, and because I only have a few pictures of him, I normally keep them packed safely away. I was sitting on my bed looking through them when she wandered into the room. She glanced down at a photograph of my father in his early 20s and said, as casually as anything, "That's Grandpa." I just stared at her. As far as I knew, she had never seen that photograph. My parents separated when I was young, so there weren't many pictures of my father displayed around the family home either. But she didn't hesitate. She knew exactly who he was. Part of me has always wondered whether he visited her in her dreams. My second daughter had a different experience when she was around the same age. My grandparents had given me several old mirrors from their house, including one tall, heavy mirror that I attached to the inside of my bedroom closet door. One night, my daughter climbed into bed beside me. The room was completely dark, and I was almost asleep when she suddenly started laughing. Not a quiet little giggle either. She was laughing so hard that she could barely catch her breath. I rolled over and asked, "What's so funny?" She kept laughing for a moment, then pointed toward the upper corner of the room, right above the mirror. "The man is making silly faces," she said. I sat up immediately. I stared at the corner, but there was nothing there. She kept pointing and asking, "You don't see him?" Then she would laugh again. I was frozen, trying to convince myself that maybe she was half asleep or imagining something in the darkness. After a while, she suddenly became calm. "He left," she said. Then she lay back down as though nothing unusual had happened. I turned on every light in the room and stayed awake for a long time. I kept telling myself that perhaps it was my grandfather playing with her. I certainly preferred that explanation over the alternatives. My youngest child is still little, and he has some difficulties with speech, so it can be hard to understand exactly what he sees or feels. But there was one moment I'll never forget. He came racing into the kitchen from the living room, completely terrified. I picked him up and carried him back, trying to show him that everything was fine. The moment we passed the open linen cupboard, he panicked. He buried his face against my shoulder and refused to look in that direction. Each time I moved away, he slowly relaxed. Each time I carried him near the cupboard again, he reacted exactly the same way. Whatever he believed was inside that cupboard frightened him more than I had ever seen before. He also talks about someone he calls Papa. His father passed away when he was only a few weeks old, so he never had the chance to know him. Still, whenever he sees a photograph of his dad, he points and says, "Papa." Maybe he learned the word from hearing us talk. Or maybe there is more to it than that. The experience that disturbed me most happened years later, when my two daughters were older and sharing a bedroom. They both saw the same figure, but neither of them knew the other had seen it. My oldest daughter's bed was positioned beside the closet. From where she lay, she couldn't look directly inside it without turning her head. One night, she was lying in bed scrolling through her phone when she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. She said a hand slowly appeared from inside the closet. The fingers were unnaturally long. When she turned to look directly at it, the hand snapped back into the darkness. She tried to ignore it and returned to her phone. A few moments later, something leaned out from the closet. She could only see it through her peripheral vision, but she knew immediately that it wasn't a person. It had enormous eyes, a wide mouth, and long strands of dark hair hanging around its face. And it was smiling at her. Every time she tried to look directly at it, the figure moved back into the closet so quickly that she could never see it clearly. Eventually, she pulled the blanket over her head and forced herself to fall asleep. My second daughter saw the same thing on another night. She was cleaning their bedroom when she suddenly felt someone standing behind her. Assuming it was her sister, she turned around. The figure was in the doorway. It was clinging to the upper corner, peering into the room. She described the same dark hair, the same huge eyes, and the same stretched smile. She looked away, convinced that when she looked back, it would be gone. It wasn't. It was still there, watching her. She said it felt as though they stared at each other forever, even though it was probably only a few seconds. Finally, she forced herself to look away again. When she turned back, the doorway was empty. Neither of my daughters told the other what had happened because each one was afraid of frightening her sister. We only learned the truth during a family visit, when we were all sitting together and talking about the strange experiences we'd had over the years. My oldest daughter mentioned the figure in the closet. Before she could describe it completely, my second daughter went pale and said, "I saw it too." Then she described the exact same face. I still get chills thinking about that moment. I went into their bedroom afterward and cleansed the entire space. Whatever that thing was, it was no longer welcome in our home. All right, let me tell you about something that happened when I was around 11 years old, back when my family lived near Claremore, Oklahoma. My father had spent most of his life importing European antiques. His warehouses were packed with everything imaginable: carved beds from old estates, enormous dining tables, royal wardrobes, battered tavern furniture, strange fossils, ceremonial masks, and countless other objects that had survived hundreds of years. Every now and then, he would bring one of the more interesting pieces home. One evening in the late 1980s, he arrived with a portrait painted sometime in the 1700s. It showed a pale woman in a dark dress, sitting against an almost black background. He hung it above our fireplace. You know those paintings where the eyes seem to follow you around the room? This one was different. It didn't just feel like she was watching you. It felt like she knew you were watching her. From the moment it went up, the house felt wrong. My dad and I both admitted that the painting made us uncomfortable, and before the night was over, he said he would take it back to the warehouse first thing in the morning. But we didn't make it until morning. Late that night, I was sitting on the living room floor playing a video game. My dad was behind me in his favorite chair, quietly reading the newspaper. Without warning, this crushing feeling of dread came over me. It felt as though something hateful was staring straight into my back. Every instinct in my body was telling me that I was in danger, and somehow, I knew exactly where it was coming from. I slowly turned toward the fireplace. My dad had already lowered his newspaper. He was staring at the portrait too. We looked at each other, and he didn't ask me what was wrong. He just stood up and said, very calmly, "Put your shoes on. We're getting that thing out of here." It was close to midnight when we loaded the portrait into the back of the car and drove toward his storage building outside Tulsa. When we arrived, my dad carried the painting inside, locked the building, and came back to the car. Then we started for home. For the first few minutes, neither of us said anything. Then my dad glanced into the rearview mirror. His face changed. I looked too. The woman from the portrait was sitting in the back seat. She wasn't moving. She wasn't smiling. She was simply sitting there with her hands folded in her lap, staring at us through the mirror. I spun around. The seat was empty. When I faced forward again and looked into the mirror, she was there. My dad saw her too. Every time we looked behind us, there was nothing. But every time we checked the rearview mirror, the woman was sitting in that seat, perfectly still. My dad suddenly turned the car around so sharply that the tires screamed against the road. He drove back to the warehouse faster than I had ever seen him drive. The moment we stopped, he opened the glove compartment and pulled out an old hunting knife. He told me to stay in the car. Then he ran inside. A few minutes later, he returned, breathing hard. He wouldn't tell me everything at first, but later he admitted that he had slashed the portrait again and again until the woman's face was completely destroyed. We drove home. The back seat remained empty. The woman never appeared in the mirror again, And for years, we convinced ourselves that whatever had been attached to that painting was gone. And maybe it was. At least, that's what we believed. Until nearly 30 years later. So, these are two stories that have stayed with me since I was a kid. The first one happened to my mom's youngest brother when he was a teenager. Based on his age, it must have been sometime around the early 1960s. I was probably 9 or 10 when he told me about it. I loved anything spooky back then, so one afternoon I asked him whether he had ever seen a ghost or experienced something he couldn't explain. He hesitated for a moment, then told me about the day he and 3 of his friends went exploring some caves near where they lived. This was a very rural area. There were miles of open fields, rocky hills, and hardly another house in sight. The nearest town was probably 15 miles away, and the caves were tucked into a stretch of land most people rarely visited. The boys spent most of the afternoon climbing through narrow passages and looking around with flashlights. At some point, my uncle found a long, weathered bone lying near the back wall of one of the caves. He didn't know what kind of bone it was. Being a teenager, though, he thought it was interesting and decided to take it with him. After a few hours, everyone got hungry, so they drove into a small nearby town and stopped at a family-owned diner. The place had a few wooden tables outside, and while they ate sandwiches and drank bottles of soda, my uncle leaned the bone against the side of their table. That was when he noticed someone watching him. A man was standing beside an old tree about 25 feet away. He looked like he was wearing a faded military uniform, the kind my uncle had only seen in old photographs. The strange thing was that the man was missing one of his legs. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He simply stared at my uncle. Then, very slowly, the man lifted one hand and pointed directly at the bone. My uncle turned to his friends and asked, "Do you see that man over there?" They looked toward the tree, but none of them saw anyone. When my uncle looked back, the man was still standing there, still pointing. Suddenly, the whole world seemed to tilt. My uncle became dizzy and fell beside the table. His heart was racing, and he could barely explain what he had seen. He'd always been a quiet, nervous person, and the experience frightened him badly. One of his friends stayed with him while the others wrapped the bone in an old cloth and drove it back to the cave. My uncle never saw the soldier again. I remember trying to ask him more questions. I wanted to know what the uniform looked like, how long the man had been standing there, and whether my uncle believed the bone had belonged to him. But my mom stopped me. She could see that her brother was becoming anxious, and she gently told me to leave the subject alone. The second story happened to my dad when he was a boy. He grew up on a ranch that had been in his family since the 19th century. It covered more than 100 acres and was surrounded by undeveloped land. At night, there were no streetlights, no traffic, and no nearby neighbors. Just open country and darkness. My dad experienced several unusual things on that ranch, but this was always the story that frightened me most. He was around 9 years old when it happened, sometime in the late 1940s. One evening, after supper, he went to rest in a sitting room across the courtyard from the main part of the house. The rooms in those old ranch houses weren't always connected, so you sometimes had to step outside to move from one part of the home to another. The sitting room was empty. My dad closed the thick wooden door behind him, lay down on a woven rug, and shut his eyes. He wasn't asleep. He was simply resting. A few minutes later, he felt something touch his face. It felt like a warm, furry paw resting gently against his cheek. He sat up immediately and looked around. There was nothing there. The door was still closed, and it was so old and heavy that it made a loud creaking sound whenever anyone opened it. There was no way an animal could have entered without him hearing it. The family didn't own a dog either, and the nearest neighboring ranch was miles away. After a while, he convinced himself that he must have imagined it. Then, a few weeks later, it happened again. He returned to the same room after supper, closed the door, and lay down in nearly the same place. At some point, he felt the furry paw press against his cheek. This time, he was ready. Without opening his eyes, he reached up and grabbed whatever was touching him. He told me he could feel it clearly in his hand. It felt like the lower leg and paw of a large dog, maybe even a coyote. There was fur beneath his fingers, and for one brief second, it felt completely solid. Then it began to disappear. Not pull away, disappear. He said it dissolved inside his grip until he was holding nothing but empty air. When he opened his eyes, the room was still empty and the wooden door was still firmly shut. He never found out what touched him. That story has always stayed with me because it wasn't something he simply saw from a distance. Whatever it was, he felt it. And for one impossible moment, he actually held it in his hand. I must have been around 11 when this happened. At the time, my family lived in an old duplex in Massachusetts, and my bedroom was in the front corner of the house. That place always felt a little strange. We'd hear noises coming from the attic when nobody was up there. Sometimes, late at night, it sounded like someone was slowly walking up the stairs. Shadows seemed to move across the downstairs walls, and our dog, Benny, would occasionally stare into an empty corner and growl. My mom was convinced something was in the house. I wasn't. I thought she was letting her imagination get the better of her. My bedroom had an unusual layout. When you opened the door, you entered a narrow hallway about 6 feet long. I kept a small bookshelf and my shoes along one side. Once you walked through that little passage, the room opened up. My bed was against the wall directly opposite the hallway. From where I sat, I could only see the very end of it and part of my closet. One night, around 9:30, I was sitting in bed watching television. The room was dark except for the flickering light from the screen. Then I heard my bedroom door open. I looked toward the hallway, expecting someone to come in, but nothing happened. I didn't see anyone. I remember thinking, that sounded exactly like my door. Still, I shrugged it off and went back to watching television. Less than a minute later, I heard footsteps inside the little hallway. Clear, slow footsteps. I looked over again. I figured it was my younger sister Lily trying to sneak up on me. She loved doing things like that. So I stared at the corner and waited for her to jump out. But nobody appeared. Another minute passed. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something begin to move. Very slowly, a woman's head leaned around the edge of the hallway. She had long, dark hair, and judging by the height of her face, she seemed short, just like my mom. In the dim television light, I couldn't make out her features clearly, but I was completely certain it was her. She was just staring at me. I stared back and gave her this annoyed look, like, "What do you want?" She didn't react. She didn't blink or smile. She just stayed there, with only her head visible around the corner. Finally, I said, "What?" Nothing. So I said it again, louder. "What?" The head immediately pulled back out of sight. I sat there for a moment, confused and irritated. I thought my mom was trying to scare me, but I couldn't understand why she wasn't laughing or saying anything. Then I realized I hadn't heard footsteps leaving. I hadn't heard the bedroom door open. I hadn't heard anything at all. That was when the goosebumps started. I slowly climbed out of bed and walked toward the hallway. When I reached the exact spot where I had seen the woman's head, I stopped. I took a breath, then quickly leaned around the corner, expecting to find my mom crouched near the door. There was nobody there. The hallway was empty. My bedroom door was still closed. I ran straight into my mom's room, crying and begging her to admit she had been standing in my doorway. She looked completely confused, and when she realized how frightened I was, she started tearing up too. She swore she had never left her room. Then she quietly said, "I've always told you there's something strange about this house." Years later, I learned that the duplex had been built near the remains of an old 19th century cemetery that had been relocated when the neighborhood was developed. I still don't know what looked around that corner at me. All I know is that it looked enough like my mother to make me feel safe at first. And somehow, that was the most frightening part. Since we're talking about dreams, there's one experience I've carried with me for years. I think it happened sometime between 2010 and 2014, but I honestly couldn't tell you the exact year. It was nighttime in the dream, just as it had been when I went to sleep. I was in the bedroom of the house where I lived back then, several floors above the street. At first, I heard something near the window. It may have been knocking or tapping, or even just a sound my mind interpreted that way. I can't be certain anymore. Then I noticed a figure outside. There was a woman's voice asking me to let her in. She spoke calmly at first, almost as though she were making an ordinary request. But I could only see her outline against the darkness, and there was nothing ordinary about her shape. She looked deeply inhuman. Her entire form was darker than the night around her, almost unnaturally black. Years later, the closest image I could compare her to was a shadowy depiction of Kali, although this creature seemed far less human. When I didn't let her in, her voice changed. The calmness disappeared, and I could feel anger building in her. What I remember most clearly is how aware I became. It didn't feel like a normal dream, or even one of those lucid dreams where you realize you're asleep and begin controlling what happens. This was different. It felt like being half-conscious and suddenly realizing you were in immediate danger. Everything sharpened at once, and then I felt something I have only experienced 1 or 2 times in my life. I felt death. Not fear of death, death itself. It was almost physical, like heat against the skin or cold sinking into your bones. I knew, without anyone telling me, that if I allowed her inside, I would die. The whole thing seemed to happen within seconds. Then there was a violent crash. The window shattered, and suddenly she was inside my room. But this is the part that has stayed with me. She was lying on the floor, completely motionless. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't trying to stand. And her appearance had changed. The creature outside the window was gone. In its place was an incredibly beautiful young woman. She looked pale, with delicate features and long, dark hair. She seemed small and almost fragile. Even in the dream, I remember noticing how strikingly beautiful she was. I don't remember what happened after that. At some point, I woke up. For years, I've tried to understand why she became motionless after entering. Part of me wondered whether it was because I had never given her permission. Maybe, in whatever strange rules governed that experience, entering without an invitation left her powerless. I've also wondered whether the dark creature outside was her true form, and the beautiful woman was something she transformed into for protection. Maybe she believed that if she appeared harmless, I wouldn't try to hurt her. That's one reason I've always connected the dream with vampires, although I've also thought of her as something demonic. In my mind, the 2 possibilities became almost indistinguishable. There have even been moments when I've wondered whether she was a real person somewhere in the world, someone who somehow crossed into my dream. Maybe it was telepathy. maybe it was something else entirely. I know how strange that sounds. The strangest part is that I've sometimes wondered whether she will ever return. You would think that after feeling certain I was about to die, I would never want to see her again. But there is still a kind of curiosity there, a pull toward the mystery of it. I know that probably isn't a healthy feeling, but it's the truth. I should also mention that I had already seen the original Salem's Lot and read the book long before this dream. Some parts of the experience do resemble it, especially the figure appearing outside the window, so I can't completely dismiss the possibility that my mind borrowed from those images. Still, the dream felt different. About a year later, I learned about the stories of black-eyed children, or BEKs. People described children appearing outside homes, asking to be let inside, then becoming angry when refused. The similarity unsettled me. The request for permission, the sudden anger, the overwhelming sense that letting them inside would lead to death. At the time of the dream, I had never heard those stories, and I had never told anyone about what happened. Even if the black-eyed children are only an urban legend, the connection still feels uncanny. I rarely speak about this experience. Sometimes I get the uncomfortable feeling that talking about it draws attention to me, as though the woman somehow knows when I remember her. But I'm not afraid. Not exactly. So that's the story of the woman outside my window, and the dream I still think of as my vampire encounter. Hey, I want to share with you a story that happened to me just before Halloween. Something that still creeps me out whenever I think about it. So, picture this. It's the day before Halloween, and I get this call from my coworker, Miranda. Now, Miranda isn't just any coworker. She's the only criminal pathologist in our area, which is pretty neat because we don't usually deal with much crime in our small town. She's the one who handles autopsies for the police. We had only known each other a few months, but we'd become good friends in that short time. Anyway, Miranda calls me up and asks for a favor. She wants me to take her nephew and his 2 friends out trick-or-treating. The thing is, after the summer when a couple of kids went missing on a hiking trail, thankfully they were found safe, the parents have become pretty strict. They'll only let the kids go out if an adult is supervising. Miranda's working late that night, and with the parents' busy schedules, I was the only one available. So, I agreed. That evening, I drove over to the nearby city where Miranda lived. When I arrived, Miranda was unloading the kids from her car. She looked a bit nervous, but mostly just cautious about the chaos a group of kids could get into. She handed me the trick-or-treat bags and a map of the route, just to make sure I knew where to go since I wasn't familiar with the city's suburbs. I was pretty comfortable with the main street downtown, but the rest was new territory for me. She introduced me to the kids one by one, even though I already knew their names. There was Sam, Miranda's nephew, about 13 years old, dressed as a skeleton in a full bodysuit with face paint. Then Kim, his friend, a bit shorter, dressed as a classic vampire. They told me their costumes had a theme this year. Classic Halloween characters, nothing flashy like superheroes or TV characters. It was about sticking to the old-school, easy-to-find costumes. Next was Kim's little brother, Jerry, or Jer Bear as everyone called him, who looked about 7. He was in a handmade robot costume made out of cardboard boxes. Kim was holding a string attached to Jerry's wrist because his robot helmet made it hard for him to see, so the string was to keep him from getting lost. And then there was Allie. She was about Sam's age, but her face was hidden behind this giant, oversized jack-o'-lantern head. That was it for her costume. An enormous pumpkin covering her entire head, paired with a black hoodie and leggings. She had glow-stick bracelets on her wrists and some long sticks dangling from her sweater's hem. She didn't say a word the whole time, just quietly stood there. Sam said they met her at the Halloween fair earlier that day, and that she was shy but really cool. Apparently, she won all the toys at the games. I noticed she didn't carry a trick-or-treat bag, and she wasn't collecting candy like the others. I asked if she wanted us to slow down so she could join in, but she just waved her hand, uninterested. I figured maybe she just liked watching. Once Miranda left for work, I took charge. I held Jer Bear's hand because he was slow and clumsy in his robot suit, while Sam and Kim ran ahead, excited to start getting candy. Allie stayed close to me, silent and still under the pumpkin head. As we moved along the main street, crowded with little ghosts and goblins, I felt the warmth of the Halloween spirit. Laughter, chatter, the crinkle of candy wrappers, the jingling of costumes. I even got to chat a bit with some of the other kids, which was surprisingly fun. We were all having a good time, until near the end of the main street. The crowd started to thin out, and the chatter faded into an eerie quiet. The streetlights flickered, and the houses around us went dark. No porch lights, no welcoming glow, just the faint flicker of candles and jack-o'-lanterns. I noticed the kids getting uneasy, their earlier excitement replaced by nervous glances and shrinking footsteps. That's when Sam mentioned the scary rumors they'd been whispering about all night. There was a headless corpse that roamed the woods, but more chilling was the story of Mr. Top Hat, a creature with a crooked, worn top hat and glowing orange eyes, who appeared if you were the last trick-or-treater on the street. The legend said the lights would go out, a thick fog would roll in, and you'd hear a cackling laughter before he showed up. And then, just like that, a fog crept in from the far end of the street. The kids clung to me, their faces pale and trembling. I picked up Jerry and held his hand, while Sam and Kim gripped my legs tightly. Allie stayed close but silent, her pumpkin head slightly tilted as if listening. From the mist, two glowing orange eyes appeared, along with a long, thin hand wrapped in tattered gloves. The creature stepped out, hunched low, limbs lanky and unnaturally long. Its top hat was ragged, its greasy black hair tangled like spider legs, and its mouth was a gruesome slit running from forehead to chin. Its chest was an open ribcage glowing with an eerie orange light. It looked down at us with those burning eyes, and I swear it was sizing us up. It reached out the hand holding the burlap sack, which squirmed and rattled like it held a nest of rodents. Then, in a voice like ripping paper, it said, "Trick or treat." I froze. The kids gasped silently, and Jerry sobbed quietly against me. I looked to the boys for guidance, and Sam whispered, "You have to say it back. Finish the rhyme. The smell my feet part." I couldn't believe it. Was that all? Just say the rhyme and we'd be okay? Kim shot a glare at Sam, reminding him there was an exchange of candy afterward, which was important. The creature's fingers curled impatiently, but it waited. I nodded, ready to do whatever it took to keep these kids safe. "All right, we'll say it together. Jer Bear, you too." The kids lined up, steeling themselves. The creature's voice came again, low and chilling. "Trick or treat?" We all took a deep breath and shouted, "Trick or treat! Smell my feet! Give me something good to eat!" I felt my face flush with embarrassment, but there was no room for hesitation. The street was silent, the tension thick, and then the creature laughed, a sound that crawled under my skin. It opened the sack, and I could hear faint, desperate squeals and scratching inside before it pulled out its hand, now filled with shimmering black goodie bags. Inside, candy skulls glowed like tiny pearls. Sam stepped forward bravely, offering some of his chocolate bars and taking a bag. He noticed Allie had no candy to give and carefully picked out some chip bags for her to trade. Jerry advised Kim not to give the creature old-fashioned Tootsie Rolls, calling them old people candy. A funny moment that lightened the mood a bit. When everyone had exchanged their treats, the creature closed its sack and said, "See you next year?" I swear it winked before disappearing back into the fog. Just like that, the lights around us flickered back on, and the street felt alive again. The kids were shaken, but safe. Sam let out a nervous laugh. That was insane. I agreed silently. No one wanted to linger, so we headed home quickly. Kim and Jerry were dropped off first, and I made sure to text Miranda so she knew they were safe. The kids were tired but grateful, and I promised Jerry I'd take them next year if I could. Sam's apartment was next. He lived above a closed shop, and when I sent him inside, he waved down at me from his window with a tired smile. That left only Allie, or Ellie, as I found out later, to take home. We walked quietly through the last few blocks. Then I asked, "Did you have fun tonight, Ellie?" He froze, then slowly removed the jack-o'-lantern head. Underneath was a boy with pale, white wavy hair plastered to his face with sweat, and glowing red eyes that met mine. "Was it that obvious?" he asked, his voice soft and almost shy. I realized then that Ellie was the same boy I'd met months before, the one who had helped save those missing children. His gender-neutral features had fooled me, as had his quiet nature. He wasn't wearing shoes, which was the first clue, and his real name was so close to the one he'd given earlier that it was a dead giveaway. He explained that his job was to watch over monsters and keep them in check. The creature we met was one he created last year, designed to be scary but fair. A way to keep Halloween fun yet thrilling for kids without letting fear get out of control. He said, "Sometimes rumors can create facts. I wanted to control this one before it grew too terrifying." I admired how thoughtful that was. Kids' imaginations can run wild, and without rules, the monsters they'd imagine could become unstoppable horrors. Ellie wanted to keep that balance. As we stood outside a closing cafe, I ducked in to grab a few treats. When I returned, I knelt beside Ellie, hiding the candy behind my back. His eyes lit up with curiosity. "You need to say it," I said gently. With hesitation, Ellie held out his empty pumpkin and whispered, "Trick or treat." I smiled and filled his bucket with candy apples. It was the first time I'd ever seen him enjoy trick-or-treating, and I think, in that moment, I wanted to adopt him right then and there. So, that's the story. A Halloween night filled with friendship, fear, and a little magic. And if you're ever the last one trick-or-treating on your street, maybe keep an eye out for Mr. Top Hat. Just remember the rhyme, and you might just be okay. I really need help, and I know this is going to sound strange. It's a long story, but I'm honestly grateful to anyone willing to listen without immediately deciding I'm imagining everything. I'm 19, and ever since I was a child, I've noticed things that other people don't seem to. I wouldn't call myself psychic. It's more like I can walk into a room and immediately sense when something feels wrong. Sometimes it happens around certain people or objects, too. The women on my mom's side of the family have always described having the same kind of intuition. My first experience happened when I was around 7. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw what looked like a pale figure hovering over my bed. Its face seemed hollow and sunken. I was young, so maybe it was just a nightmare, but I can still remember it clearly. As I got older, I would occasionally see shadows moving in doorways or across walls. Most of the time, I could convince myself there was a normal explanation. Things changed during lockdown. At the time, I was struggling with my faith. I would lie awake at night and speak out loud to whatever might be listening, asking for some kind of sign that I wasn't alone. Looking back, I wish I hadn't done that. It felt like I had opened a door without knowing what was on the other side. At first, I began smelling my great-grandfather's aftershave in my bedroom. It was a very specific scent, warm and slightly spicy, and it made me feel safe. I thought maybe he was watching over me. Then the smell stopped. Not long after that, I started noticing a tall, dark shape moving around the corners of my room. I would see it out of the side of my eye, but whenever I turned toward it, it disappeared. It followed me for months. I would feel it standing behind me in hallways or watching from the doorway while I was trying to sleep. Whatever it was, it didn't feel comforting. It felt patient, almost as though it had used the familiar scent to make me lower my guard. About a year later, I started praying consistently and asking God to remove anything harmful from my home. Eventually, the figure stopped appearing. I thought it was over. But during the past year, that feeling has returned. I don't see the figure as clearly anymore. Somehow, that's worse. It feels like it has learned how to hide. I'll enter a room and feel the atmosphere change instantly, like the air has become heavier. Sometimes I can sense it following me down the hallway and into my bedroom. For a while, I tried to ignore it. I thought that refusing to react might make it leave. Then it began getting closer. A few months ago, I was lying on my side in bed, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I saw something low to the ground moving toward me. It looked like a shadow crawling across the carpet. The moment I sat up, it vanished. Until then, I had never felt as though it was trying to approach me physically. The last few nights have been much worse. 3 nights ago, I felt a sudden burning sensation along my calf. I assumed I had scratched myself without noticing, but there wasn't a mark when I checked. By the next day, a thin cut had appeared. It's shallow, but it has become more irritated instead of healing. The following night was quiet. Then, last night happened. I was sitting in bed with my little dog curled beside me. He was asleep while I was looking at my phone. Suddenly, the entire bed began shaking. It didn't feel like a small vibration. It felt as though someone had grabbed the frame and rattled it. My dog immediately stood up and stared at the floor beside the bed. Then he jumped down, crossed the room, and sat near the door. I tried not to panic. I said a prayer and continued scrolling because I didn't want to give whatever was happening a reaction. A few minutes later, while my dog was still sitting across the room, I felt the mattress sink beside me. It felt exactly like something had climbed into bed. I turned on my flashlight and searched the blankets, the floor, and underneath the bed. There was nothing there. Then I felt it beside me again, and I could hear breathing. It was slow, close, and coming from the empty space next to my shoulder. Today there were 2 loud knocks from inside the wall near the kitchen. My mom and my younger brother both heard them. Even the dogs reacted and started barking, so I know that part wasn't only in my head. My mom and grandmother have both admitted that the house feels different lately. They describe it as tense and heavy. But part of me keeps wondering whether we're frightening one another and interpreting ordinary things as something more sinister. I feel terrified, but I also feel embarrassed. I don't know whether something paranormal is happening, whether there's a medical or environmental explanation, or whether I need to speak to a mental health professional. I just need someone to take me seriously and tell me what the safest next step is, because right now, I don't feel safe sleeping in my own room. Hey, so I want to share this wild, kind of unsettling experience I had near my grandfather's cabin. It's a place tucked away close to a lake, but honestly, it feels like the middle of nowhere, like really isolated. You have to walk a good bit just to get to town, and forget about your phone signal. It's barely there. My grandfather had a bad fall early in the summer, broke his hip pretty badly. The whole town found out because it's small and everyone knows everyone's business. He was going to be in the hospital for a while, and he was worried that the local teenagers might get the wrong idea and start partying or breaking into the cabin while he was gone. Out of all his grandkids, apparently, I was the most trustworthy. Maybe because I wasn't the type to cause trouble, or maybe just luck. Anyway, he asked me to house sit until he was back on his feet. I'm not really into camping or the outdoors, but the cabin made me rethink that a little. The air there is just clean and quiet. You don't realize how much noise you get used to in the city until it's gone. On my first day, I spent hours cleaning, dusting every surface, washing blankets because who knows what crawled in while Grandpa was too hurt to take care of things. I even took a trip into town to stock up on food. By the end of that day, I was wiped out. I barely noticed when I heard what sounded like cars driving down the dirt road near the cabin. Cars are rare on that road, so it caught my attention, but I was so tired I just shrugged it off as my brain filling in noises. Little did I know, that night was just the start of something strange. The next morning, I had a simple breakfast and decided to take a short walk. A friend of mine, an artist, had asked me to take pictures of the woods for his project, so I grabbed my camera. I stayed close to the cabin, not wanting to get lost. When I reached the dirt road, I stopped and stared at all the tire tracks in the dust. The more I looked, the weirder it felt. Why were there so many cars? Then, I spotted an SUV parked off to the side a little way down. It looked like one of those FBI vehicles from TV shows. Big, black, and clean to a fault. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started walking toward it, thinking maybe someone needed help. But the closer I got, the weirder it felt. The SUV was spotless and didn't seem like it belonged in the middle of the woods. When I pulled out my camera to snap a picture, I noticed the license plate had no state on it, just the numbers 202. That was creepy. I took a quick photo, feeling a twinge of guilt. This was definitely going to be a story for Grandpa when he got back. I started to think, maybe all those cars I heard last night were part of some law enforcement operation, like looking for something or someone. I've listened to enough true crime podcasts to know that stuff happens. I spotted a trail near where the SUV was parked and decided to follow it a little, camera ready. But I quickly realized two things. I'm terrible at hiking, and the woods are downright eerie. The trees stretched on endlessly, and even though birds chirped here and there, I kept hearing this odd clicking sound, like something wasn't quite natural. Sweat stung my eyes, and I had to stop to catch my breath. That's when I realized I'd lost the trail completely. Panic set in. The clicking noise grew louder, as if whatever was making it was moving closer. My heart felt like it was pounding out of my chest. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a large hand rest on my shoulder. I screamed, a sharp, high-pitched sound, and spun around, only to find a tall man wearing a suit and sunglasses standing there. A suit in the middle of the woods? He looked like he belonged to that SUV. I stammered, I'm lost. He didn't say a word, but started guiding me back with his hand still on my shoulder. I was freaking out internally, but tried to look calm. He smelled like some secret government agent. Sunglasses, suit, the whole package. I couldn't help but make a nervous joke about my last name being Anderson, and if his name was Smith, it would be like the Matrix. He didn't laugh, but his grip tightened, and I could tell he was serious. He asked, "How did you know my name?" I blurted out, "Your car, the license plate?" He eased up a bit and warned me to stay out of the woods for a few days. We didn't talk the rest of the way back, and when we reached the road, he let me go. Then he asked to see my camera, wanting to delete the photo of the SUV. I was hesitant and a little defensive, but he was polite enough that I let him. Oddly, he deleted one extra photo, just a shot of some trees I'd taken before getting lost. When I questioned it, he claimed it was a slip of the finger. I didn't press it. I tried to get him to tell me what was going on. Were they hunting for bodies? Aliens? He just said, Aliens. With such deadpan seriousness, I almost believed him. After he left, I went back to the cabin, my mind spinning with questions. I spent the afternoon in the town library, searching for anything strange about the area. Nothing. The locals hadn't seen any black SUVs or men in black suits prowling the woods. I even found out the diner had the best meatloaf. Silver lining, I guess. That night, I was exhausted and fell asleep quickly. But then, in the dead of night, I woke up to noises downstairs. My heart was racing. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the stairs, every creak making me want to bolt. In the kitchen, I saw pots and pans clattering. Something big was rummaging through the cupboards. When I shone my flashlight, a dark shape crashed down, knocking over chairs and leaving deep scratch marks on the floor. It darted out the back door, slamming it hard. I called the cops. They showed up an hour later, a bit annoyed but polite. The officer joked that raccoons have hands and probably let themselves in. We laughed, but the damage was real. The only thing missing was a punctured box of table salt. I still don't know why it wanted salt, but okay. The cops helped me fix the door temporarily and gave me a contact for a repair guy. I paid the guy with 2 six-packs, a fair trade. After all that, I couldn't resist following the tracks outside to the tree line. But I didn't want to get lost again, and the agent's warning echoed in my mind. I took a walk down the dirt road, the summer sun blazing overhead. I heard families splashing in the lake nearby and birds singing. Then, out of nowhere, 3 black SUVs came down the road. People in black suits jumped out and disappeared into the woods. I tried to follow, but they were gone before I could catch up. Then, from the trail, the agent appeared. He saw me and made a shooing motion. When he got close, he scowled and warned me again to stay out of the woods. I teased him a bit, but he just told me not to press my luck. He opened the back of an SUV and pulled out a heavy black metal box, asking if I could carry it. I tried, but it was way too heavy. He picked it up effortlessly, probably enjoying the moment. Before he left, he repeated his warning one last time. I felt like I was stuck in some spy thriller, but I still had no clues about what was really going on. The heat and the stress nearly knocked me out when I got back. I took a cool shower and accidentally napped through most of the afternoon. Seriously, how do these guys wear suits in this heat? So yeah, that's where things stand. There are definitely agents in the woods near the cabin, and whatever they're guarding or investigating is something huge. I'm torn between being terrified and fascinated. But one thing's for sure, I'm going to keep digging, even if it's just from a safe distance. I'll update you when I find out more. I've never really considered myself someone who believes in the paranormal. I don't judge people who do, and I'm definitely not saying strange things can't happen. I've just always been the kind of person who looks for a practical explanation first. Stress, coincidence, imagination, something like that. But there's one thing that has followed me for years, and no explanation has ever completely fit. I first heard the voice when I was 19. I had moved several states away from my family and rented a tiny apartment in an old building near the Canadian border. The place wasn't exactly charming. The pipes rattled, the windows leaked cold air, and the hallway always smelled faintly like wet carpet. Still, it was mine. It was the first time I had ever lived completely alone, so when I began hearing things, I assumed loneliness was getting to me. The first time it happened, I had overslept before an early shift. I woke up because a man's voice said, very clearly, "You're late, baby. Come on, you need to get up." It sounded close, almost as though someone were standing beside the bed. I opened my eyes, grabbed my phone, and realized my shift had started nearly 20 minutes earlier. I panicked, threw on whatever clothes I could find, and rushed out the door. I didn't really think about the voice until weeks later. I had just worked back-to-back shifts and came home completely exhausted. I lay down on the couch without even taking off my shoes and fell asleep almost immediately. Sometime during the night, that same voice started shouting, "Babe, wake up!" At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then it got louder. "Baby, you have to get out. Wake up now. Get outside." There was so much urgency in his voice that I didn't stop to question it. I jumped up, ran downstairs, and stumbled out into the freezing air wearing nothing but sweatpants and socks. The moment I reached the sidewalk, I became violently sick. My head was pounding. I felt dizzy and confused, and I started throwing up near the front steps. The building door had locked behind me, so I called emergency services. It was sometime after 1 in the morning, and I was barely able to explain what was happening. The officer who arrived suspected carbon monoxide almost immediately. The fire department came soon afterward and evacuated the building. Several apartments had dangerously high readings. A few of my neighbors were taken to the hospital, but thankfully, everyone survived. For a long time, I convinced myself the voice had been caused by the carbon monoxide. Maybe my brain had sensed something was wrong and turned that feeling into a hallucination. That explanation made sense. At least, it did until I heard the voice again. By then, I had moved to another city and was living in a completely different building. One evening, about a year later, I was taking a bag of trash out to the alley. Just before I stepped through the gate, the voice said, "Drop it, babe. Go back inside." I froze for a second, but then I ignored it. A moment later, a man came sprinting around the corner with 2 police officers chasing him. He slammed straight into me, knocking me onto the pavement. The trash bag burst open everywhere. He barely looked back before getting up and running again. One of the officers raced past without stopping, which I can laugh about now, but at the time I just sat there staring at the mess around me. The voice had warned me again, and it had been right. Since then, I've heard it only occasionally. Sometimes several years pass without anything at all. It is always the same voice. A young man, though definitely an adult. Calm most of the time, but firm when something is wrong. He never uses my name. He always calls me babe or baby, and he never says anything unless it's a warning. He has told me to slow down before nearly being hit at an intersection. Once he told me to check on someone moments before they had a medical emergency. Another time, he woke me shortly before a small earthquake, several minutes before the alert appeared on my phone. The voice has never threatened me. It has never asked me to do anything harmful or strange. It doesn't carry on conversations, and it never answers questions. It simply appears, warns me, and disappears again. Part of me still believes there must be a psychological explanation. Maybe my brain notices tiny details that I'm not consciously aware of and turns them into a voice I can understand. But that theory doesn't explain everything. A few years ago, after a serious car accident, I had a full brain scan. Nothing unusual showed up apart from a concussion. And yes, the voice warned me before that accident too. I still don't know what it is. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's something my mind created. Maybe it's something stranger than either of those things. Whatever it is, it has always been gentle with me. And when that voice tells me to move, wake up, or get somewhere safe, I listen now. Mostly, I don't tell people this story because I know exactly how it sounds. I work the overnight shift in an old office building downtown. There's a rumor that the place was built on the site of a former hospital morgue. I have never looked into whether that's true. Honestly, I think I'd rather not know. Old buildings always collect stories. The strange thing is, nearly everyone who works there has one. A woman from accounting once told me she saw a man standing at the far end of the third-floor corridor after everyone had gone home. She called out to him, thinking he was an employee, but he walked around the corner and simply vanished. Another coworker swears he heard someone climbing the main staircase after he had already locked every entrance. And one of the janitors refuses to enter the storage level alone. He won't explain why. He just waits until someone can go with him. I used to dismiss all of it, not because I thought they were lying. I just believed there was always a reasonable explanation. Old pipes knock, air vents groan, fluorescent lights flicker. When you spend enough time alone at night, your mind starts turning ordinary sounds into footsteps and shadows into people. Besides, no one spent more time alone in that building than I did. I figured that if something unusual was really there, I would have encountered it already. For nearly a year, I didn't. My shifts followed the same routine. At around 11, I would lock the front doors, walk through each office, check the restrooms, and look through the lobby windows at the parking lot. My car was usually the only one left outside. Then I would return to my desk and work while the building settled around me. The ceiling lights buzzed softly. The vents hummed. Pipes clicked behind the walls. Sometimes I would get chills for no obvious reason. Sometimes the conference room felt colder than the rest of the floor. But nothing ever happened that I couldn't explain. Then, a few weeks ago, something changed. It was close to Monday. I had just completed my final walkthrough. The doors were locked. The offices were empty. The restrooms were empty. There were no cars in the parking lot except mine. I know I was alone. I sat at my desk and opened a report I had been putting off all evening. That was when I heard the chime. Just one soft beep. There's a motion sensor at the entrance to the main stairwell. Whenever someone steps through the doorway, it makes a short electronic sound. I looked down the hallway and waited. Normally, the beep would be followed by footsteps. But there was nothing. I waited a few more seconds. Still nothing. At first, I was more irritated than frightened. I assumed the sensor was malfunctioning, so I got up to check it. The stairwell was empty. So was the hallway. I checked the front entrance. It was still locked. I even stepped outside and scanned the parking lot. No people. No moving cars. Nothing. I checked the restrooms again, although I already knew there was nobody inside. Then I returned to my office. The moment I sat down, the entire building became silent. Not peaceful silence. An unnatural kind of silence. The vents stopped humming. The lights stopped buzzing. Even the small creaks inside the walls disappeared. It felt as though someone had reached over and turned down the volume of the entire building. I lowered myself into my chair, and suddenly I knew there was someone behind me. I didn't suspect it. I didn't imagine it. I knew. Every part of my body was warning me that someone was standing directly behind my chair. They felt close enough to read the words on my monitor. Close enough that if I leaned back even slightly, I would touch them. I couldn't hear breathing. I couldn't see a shadow, but I could feel the presence there. My monitor was dark around the edges, and I could make out a faint reflection of the wall behind me. There was nothing in it. I wanted to turn around. I couldn't make myself do it. I was completely certain that if I looked, I would find a face waiting just inches from mine. So I kept staring at the screen. I pretended to work. I read the same line again and again without understanding a word. My hand rested on the mouse, but I didn't move it. After a while, my shoulders began to ache because every muscle in my body was clenched. Every few seconds, I held my breath and listened. I listened for breathing, for footsteps, for a voice, anything. but nothing happened. That was what frightened me most. The presence didn't feel angry. It didn't seem threatening. It felt curious, as though something had entered through the stairwell, followed me back to my office, and was now standing behind me simply to see how long I could pretend it wasn't there. Eventually, I forced myself to look at the clock in the corner of the screen. It was 12:21. More than half an hour had passed. The instant my eyes moved away from the center of the monitor, the building came back to life. The vents began humming. The lights buzzed overhead. Something clicked inside the wall beside me, and the presence disappeared. It didn't fade gradually. It felt as though someone had simply taken one step backward. I spun around. There was nobody there. The office was empty. The hallway was empty. The whole building was empty. I stayed until the end of my shift because I didn't know what else to do. The following morning, I asked the maintenance team whether the stairwell sensor had been malfunctioning. One of the technicians checked the activity record. "It only went off once last night," he said. I asked him what time. He told me it had activated at 11:49 p.m. That was the exact moment I had heard the chime. He shrugged and said it was probably an electrical fault. I tried to accept that explanation. About 2 weeks later, I finally told an older maintenance worker named Martin what had happened. He had worked in the building for more than 20 years. I expected him to smile or tell me I had been overtired. He didn't. He listened quietly until I finished. Then he looked toward the stairwell. "It stayed behind your chair, didn't it?" he said. I couldn't answer at first. I had never mentioned that part. I asked him how he knew. Martin remained silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You were fortunate." I asked what he meant. He looked directly at me. Most people turn around. Before I could ask anything else, someone called for him from another floor. He walked away. I have tried to speak with him about it 3 times since then. Every time, he acts as though the conversation never happened. Nothing unusual has occurred since that night. The sensor hasn't sounded again. The building hasn't gone silent. I haven't felt anyone standing behind me. Most nights, I can almost convince myself that exhaustion caused the whole thing. But I no longer sit with my back facing the doorway. Before every shift, I pull my chair several inches away from the wall. I tell myself I do it because the extra space is more comfortable. But recently, I noticed something. No matter where I move the chair, I always leave the same amount of room behind me. Just enough space for a person to stand there. And I still don't understand why. I remember it started as a completely ordinary night. I had stayed up way too late finishing some assignments, and by the time I finally got into bed, it was around 2 in the morning. I was tired, but not the kind of tired where you just disappear into sleep. It was that restless kind, where your body wants to shut down, but your mind keeps pacing around like it forgot something. Then, sometime around 3, I woke up to the sound of pigeons outside my window. I know the time because there's a clock hanging right across from my bed. It's one of the first things I see whenever I open my eyes. I remember staring at it, feeling annoyed and uneasy, because I already knew falling back asleep was going to be difficult. My room has a window right behind my bed. I usually keep it open for fresh air, but because there are so many pigeons around the building, I have this thin, removable mesh screen covering it. It's not something I touch often unless I'm cleaning it. That night, after waking up, I started sweating for no clear reason. I kept turning under my blanket, trying to calm myself down. Eventually, after a lot of effort, I drifted off again. And then, I heard someone calling my name. In the dream, it felt close. Too close. Like the voice wasn't coming from far away, but from right behind me. I turned toward the window. There was this pale figure standing there. White, almost blurred, with no clear face. I couldn't make out any eyes or mouth, but somehow I knew it was looking at me. Then, it grabbed my hand. That's the part I still can't explain properly, because I felt it. I felt the touch. I felt the pressure around my wrist. It started pulling me toward the window, and somehow my hand was already outside, through the opening. And then I woke up. The clock said exactly 4:15. I just lay there for a moment, frozen. I was too scared to move, too scared to look behind me. But eventually I forced myself to check the window. The mesh screen looked like it had been pulled open from the inside. I don't mean slightly loose. I mean it looked like someone had forced it out of place. And I knew I hadn't touched it. I barely ever touched it. After sitting there and overthinking every possible explanation, I called my dad. He came to my room and I told him everything. He said maybe I had done it in my sleep. But that didn't make sense to me. I sleep almost completely still, wrapped up like a mummy. I cover my whole body with a thin blanket, except for my head. And when I woke up, everything was exactly the same. My hands were still tucked inside the blanket. My dad fixed the mesh and told me to try to sleep again. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare. Then, about a month later, it happened again. That night, I had gone to bed earlier because I was exhausted. I woke up to the sound of pigeons flapping their wings outside. This time, I immediately sat up on my bed and checked the window. The mesh was perfectly attached. It wasn't loose. It wasn't hanging. It was secure. No wind could have pushed it open. I checked it carefully, then lay back down. And then I fell asleep. Once again, I heard someone calling my name. It wasn't like a normal dream. I've had dreams before where I know I'm dreaming, where I can control things a little. This was different. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even look at certain things in my room, like my clock. The voice made me turn around. That same whitish figure was there again. This time, I think it might have had a face, but I can't remember it clearly. Maybe my mind blocked it out. Maybe I just don't want to remember. Then it grabbed my arm. Just like before, it started pulling me toward the window. The second I felt that pull, I woke up. The clock said 4:15 again. I turned and looked at the window. One corner of the mesh was pushed inward, like something from outside had pressed it in. There was an opening big enough for my arm to fit through. And that's what terrified me the most. I live on the 5th floor. There is no way someone could have been outside my window doing that. I left the room and went straight to my dad. He came back with me, stood in front of the window, and didn't say anything for a while. He just stared at it. Then he told me to come sleep in his room. My mom asked what happened, but my dad only said we would talk about it in the morning. The next day, he asked me to explain everything again, slowly and in detail. I told him about the pigeons, the voice, the figure, the pulling, the time, and the mesh. When I finished, he didn't laugh. He didn't say I imagined it. He just told me that if I ever heard pigeons waking me up again at that hour, I should not go back to sleep. He said I should call him, get up, do anything, but not let myself drift off right away. He also admitted that it was strange and that he had no explanation for why it was happening. After that, he bought me an extra thin curtain to cover the window and the mesh. Since then, it hasn't happened again. But sometimes, even now, I still wake up around 3 in the morning to the sound of pigeons outside. And every time I hear them, I remember that window. I remember the hand around my wrist. And I remember the clock. 4:15. never used to be the kind of person who truly believed in ghosts. I mean, if someone asked me, I'd usually say, yeah, maybe. Because honestly, why not? The world is strange enough. But deep down, I didn't really believe there were spirits wandering around houses or anything like that. I believed it was possible, sure, but not something I expected to actually happen to me. And then I stayed at my Nana's house. Her place isn't some crumbling old manor with vines crawling up the windows. It's actually pretty modern, just really big. Big enough that when family came down to visit, all 10 of us could fit without it feeling too cramped. There were babies, cousins, my aunt, everyone. Nana was happy to have the house full, but there still weren't enough beds, so I ended up sleeping on an air mattress in the living room. This all started a few nights ago, on May 24th, 2026. That night, I was lying there with the fan on because the room was warm, watching TV sometime around midnight, or maybe closer to 1 in the morning. I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't check the exact time. I was watching one of those creepy true crime mystery videos, the kind you put on even though you know it's going to make every shadow in the room feel suspicious. Everyone else seemed asleep. The house was completely still. Then, out of nowhere, this loud, sharp beeping started. It wasn't a soft little chirp like a smoke alarm battery dying. It was shrill, screechy, painfully loud. It sounded like it was coming from just outside the living room door. At the exact same time, the internet cut out and the video froze. I just lay there frozen for a second, trying to understand what I was hearing. It was so loud that my ears actually hurt. I was just about ready to get up and run to where my mom was sleeping, even though she was all the way across the house, through 2 halls, past the kitchen, and down by the bedrooms. Then it stopped. Just like that. My heart was absolutely hammering. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe an alarm. Maybe the router. Maybe some weird electrical thing. So I turned off the TV and tried to fix the internet box beside it, standing there in the dark, still shaken. That's when I heard the banging. Thud. 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 And I need you to understand this part, because it's what really got to me. It wasn't coming from upstairs. It wasn't from the walls. It was coming from underneath me. I felt it through the floor, through the air mattress, like something below the living room was knocking upward. The banging got louder for a few seconds, then it stopped too. Same as the beeping. No fade, no explanation, just silence. I barely slept after that. The next morning, I asked my mom if she'd heard anything during the night. The beeping, the banging, any of it. She just looked confused and said she hadn't heard a thing. I explained exactly what happened, and she gave me that look people give when they're trying to be kind, but also think you were probably half asleep. She said maybe I'd been tired and imagined it. I wanted that to be true. I really did. But I know what I heard. And more than that, I know what I felt under the air mattress. I asked my sister and her boyfriend too, because they were sleeping upstairs, not far from where I was. They heard nothing either. That bothered me even more. My mom's room was pretty far away, so maybe I could understand her missing it. But upstairs? The beeping was so loud, I don't understand how they didn't wake up. Then it happened again on May 25th. Same beeping, same internet cutting out, same horrible banging under the floor. And again, nobody else heard anything. The silence afterward was almost worse than the noise, because it made the whole thing feel personal, like it was only happening for me. I still didn't have my phone nearby when it started, so I couldn't record it. But judging by the sky outside, it felt like it happened around the same time as the night before. Then came May 26th. This time, I did have my phone. And when it started again, I checked the time. It was 1:11 a.m. I wish I could say I recorded it, but I panicked. I just froze. The beeping filled the room. The banging started beneath me. And all I could do was sit there with my heart in my throat. Tonight, I'm going to try again. I'm keeping my phone close, and if it happens, I'm going to record it the second it starts. I know how this sounds. I know there are probably rational explanations, and honestly, I want one. I don't want to believe my Nana's house is haunted. But something is happening in that living room. And whatever it is, it's loud enough to terrify me, but somehow quiet enough that no one else in the house can hear it. So this happened back in the late 2000s in downtown San Diego. A friend of mine, Darren, had moved into this ridiculously cheap apartment in an old building just above one of our favorite underground bars. The place was called O'Malley's, mostly because the guy who owned the bar also owned the apartments upstairs, and everybody just treated the whole building like one strange, creaky little kingdom. The building itself was old, maybe 4 stories, built sometime in the 1930s, tucked not too far from Golden Hill. And the thing about it was, people said that back in the 60s and 70s, it had been kind of a crash pad for addicts, drifters, and people who had nowhere else to go. Over the years, a lot of people had died in those rooms. So, naturally, everybody said the place was haunted. And honestly, I believe it was. I stayed over there a lot back then. We were all in our late 20s, still living that half-broke, half-wild city life. At first, the strange stuff was small enough that you could almost talk yourself out of it. Doors would slam when there was no draft. Lights would flick on and off right in front of me. I remember turning off the bathroom light, stepping back, and watching the switch click itself right back up. Not a soft little wiggle either, a full, deliberate click. Then there were the footsteps. You would hear what sounded like a whole crowd pounding down the hallway outside the apartment. Heavy feet, fast, like people rushing the stairs. I would yank the door open, expecting to see somebody, anybody, but the hall would be empty. And the way the stairs were set up, if actual people had been running past, I would have seen them turning the corner or heading down to the next floor. But there was never anyone there. That kind of thing happened all the time. The moment that really stayed with me, though, happened one afternoon when I was there by myself. Darren was at work, and I was sitting in the tiny living room watching an old mystery show with the kitchen behind me, separated by this little half wall. Out of nowhere, I heard drawers sliding open. Then cabinets. Then the kitchen faucet blasted on full force. I called out, thinking maybe Darren had come home early. Nothing. No answer. No sound of the front door opening either, and in that apartment, you absolutely would have heard it. That door had a heavy latch and a floorboard right inside that complained every time somebody stepped on it. I sat there frozen for a few seconds, and I could feel every hair on my arm standing up. I called his name again. Still nothing. Eventually, I forced myself to get up and look into the kitchen. Several drawers were open. A couple of cabinet doors were hanging wide. The faucet was running hard into the sink. And there was no one there. Nobody had come in. Nobody had gone out. I was alone in that apartment, standing there with the water roaring and this awful feeling that I had just walked in on something I was not supposed to see. That building had a presence to it. Not just one ghost either. It felt crowded in a way. like there were layers of people still lingering there, each one carrying whatever they had brought with them from life. I never really felt hatred from them, though. That is the strange part. It did not feel evil to me. Sad, maybe, restless, sometimes almost desperate. It felt like they wanted to be noticed, like they wanted someone to understand they were still there. After a while, I started speaking out loud whenever something happened. I would say, "I know you're here. I'm sorry if I'm in your space. I don't mean you any harm." And I meant it. Because whatever those spirits were, I always had the sense they were trapped more than threatening. Like they were tied to that place by old hunger, old pain, old habits they could not put down. That apartment above O'Malley's was one of the strangest places I have ever spent time in. I do not expect everyone to believe it, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw. And I know I was not alone up there. I still remember the dream I woke from that evening. It wasn't really a dream, not the kind that disappears the moment you open your eyes. It stayed on my skin. I saw feathers falling from the sky, torn little pieces, drifting down over gray ground. There were bullet shells everywhere, shining faintly like dead insects in the last light of day. Then I woke up. The ceiling fan was turning above me, slow and tired, as if even it had lost interest in going in circles. I looked at the clock. 4:30 in the afternoon. That meant I had 6 hours before the park. 6 hours before 10:40. My name is Kamalish. Years ago, people used to call me a detective. Not in the grand way. I was never famous. But people remembered me. They lowered their voices when they said my name, as if intelligence itself required whispering. "You're a clever man, Kamalish." I heard that sentence often back then. Now it sounded like something left behind in an old room. I was almost 60, and by then I had learned one uncomfortable truth about life. Sometimes we do not become what we love. Sometimes we become what we failed to finish. I went to the bathroom, splashed water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. "So tell me, Detective Kamalish," I said softly, "after all these years, what exactly did you solve?" The answer was nothing I wanted to hear. I had come close many times, painfully close, but truth had always stopped just before my hand reached it. On my refrigerator, there was an old sticker of a hippopotamus with its mouth wide open. A tiny butterfly sat on its nose. The hippo could crush it in a second, but I had always believed the butterfly would escape just in time. That was detection, I thought, not brilliance, not courage. Timing. Knowing when to stay still, knowing when to fly. I drank some cold water and looked at the newspapers spread across my table. Again, the headlines belonged to the park killer. 5 people dead, all homeless. 3 women who sold flowers in the daytime and slept outside at night. 2 beggars. Each of them poisoned first, then killed quietly. The city was frightened, of course. Television anchors shouted. Politicians demanded action. Everyone suddenly cared about danger. But nobody had cared about the people while they were alive. Then the doorbell rang. One firm press. One weak second touch. Inspector Saniel. Nobody else rang a bell as if he were interrogating it. He came in carrying food packets and bottles of cola. He looked older than the last time I had seen him properly. His hair had retreated, his stomach had advanced, and his face carried the permanent irritation of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. "At your age," I told him, "you should be drinking whiskey, not cola." He dropped onto the sofa. "There's pressure from every side," he said. "You have to help me." I looked at him for a moment. "I don't fully understand the murders yet," I said. "But someone wants the city afraid. That much is clear." And just like that, another case came back to me. 20 years earlier. Back then, Samuel was a young police officer, and I was trying to become a great detective. We still believed truth could win if you chased it hard enough. That was the year women from the red light district started dying. Each one was found with a bullet wound on the forehead and a white rose placed in her hand. The newspapers gave the killer a name: the White Rose Butcher. I had nearly solved it. A wealthy old man, bitter and dying, had lost his son to illness. Grief had turned inside him and become hatred. He blamed sex workers. He hunted them. He arranged their deaths like rituals. I found patterns. I found motives. I found enough pieces to build the shape of the truth. And then the system arrived. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses forgot what they had said. Senior officers grew quiet in the wrong way. In the end, the police arrested a mentally unstable truck driver. A week later, he was found hanging in prison. Officially, suicide. Unofficially, convenience. The rich old man died soon after, supposedly from a fall. The killing stopped. The police congratulated themselves. The file slept. But old files do not really sleep. They breathe under the floorboards. Samuel sat across from me that evening, staring at my aquarium. One small golden fish kept circling a plastic soldier holding a tiny rifle. Round and round. History has a nasty habit of doing that. Then Samuel said something strange. Tiona blocked me. I looked at him. Tiona Rai, journalist. My former wife. There are names that do not enter a room quietly. Hers still struck furniture inside me. Samuel said they had argued online. She had criticized the police. He had tried to explain pressure, manpower, politics. Then she blocked him. I did not ask why he was telling me this. Some questions are snakes. Better not touch them unless you are ready for teeth. Tiona had once believed in me. Or perhaps she had believed in the version of me I advertised. We married young enough to mistake hunger for destiny. Later, she left for Mumbai with another journalist named Arindam, and the person who introduced them was Samuel. That evening, I lit a cigarette and stared at the smoke. On the 7th page of the newspaper, small headlines described other deaths. Lovers killing lovers, husbands poisoning wives, wives stabbing husbands, people destroying the very hands they once held. And I suddenly remembered something the falsely accused truck driver had told me 20 years ago. People are frightened creatures, he said. That is why they hide inside shells. Tiona had once said something similar, though more gently. Happiness is like a glass of water, she told me during a rainstorm. Clear for a moment, then life throws it into a washing machine. I used to laugh at lines like that. Now I understood them. Life is brief, terribly brief. We barely have time to love each other properly. So where do we find the time to kill? Samuel leaned forward then, impatient. You're getting old, Kamalish, he said. You've lost your sharpness. Why is this taking so long? Outside, birds were crossing the evening sky. The clouds had turned blue and copper and silver, stitched together by fading light. For one moment, I wanted to leave everything and simply watch the sky. But Samuel was still speaking. At least tell me how we proceed. I said, the motive is the key. Why kill people who own nothing, threaten nobody, and will not be missed by anyone powerful? Find that answer, and the rest begins to crack. Samuel smiled bitterly. It's always the weak who die first. 2 hours later, he left. 30 minutes after that, I took my revolver from the drawer. For 3 days, handwritten notes had been appearing in my old mailbox. Nobody used that mailbox anymore, which made the notes feel even more personal. The first said, "You came alone. You will leave alone, but words remain." The second said, "Meet me." The third said, "Come to the park at 10:40 p.m." That time mattered. 20 years earlier, the White Rose killings had also happened between 10 and 10:40 at night. Only the hunting ground had changed. Then, it had been brothels, empty roads, and dark alleys. Now, it was parks. I walked through the city slowly. In a small town, 10 at night already feels like midnight. Add a serial killer, and silence becomes a locked door. 2 stray dogs slept beneath a yellow street lamp. The park gate opened with a tired creak. No police. That was strange. A patrol jeep passed nearby without stopping. And then I knew. Someone was behind me. Not close. Not far. Just near enough for the air to change. Then I smelled perfume. Old perfume. The same kind I remembered from the body of the first woman killed 20 years ago. For some reason, I felt unbearably tired. Not frightened. Just tired. Then the rope came around my throat. It tightened so fast I had no time to reach my gun. I fell backward, choking, dragged across the ground like an animal. The perfume grew stronger. Through my blurred vision, I saw a figure in black cloth. Then someone struck him from the side. Hard. The attacker stumbled. Before he could run, men came out from the darkness. Plain clothes. Detective branch. Armed and ready. I got to my feet slowly, coughing, breathing like my lungs had been dragged over gravel. Then I looked at the masked man. "It's over, Samuel," I said. No one moved. The mask was pulled away. And there he was, Inspector Samuel. 20 years earlier, his uncle Mrganka had been involved in the White Rose murders. That much I had known. But Samuel had done more than protect the family name. He had buried evidence, shifted blame, fed the department a convenient monster because dead women from the margins were easy to forget. But guilt does not always die. Sometimes it ferments. Sometimes it learns new habits. "You arranged the patrols," I told him. "You made sure certain parks were empty at certain times. You created fear, then walked through it wearing authority like a coat." One of the younger officers asked me, very quietly, "Sir, how did you know?" I looked up at the moon. "I'm not sure I knew," I said. "Not at first. Maybe I only kept walking until the truth got tired of hiding." But even as I said it, another memory returned. The first woman from 20 years ago. Her room had been full of scraps of paper, little handwritten fragments, symbols, half-finished sentences, and the rose in her hand had not been perfectly white. There had been a dark stain near the stem. Black paint. The same color as my old mailbox. That was when the final thought came to me. A colder thought. What if the old case had never been one case? What if the first murder had been committed by someone else? What if Mrganka had copied it afterward? I turned back to Samuel. "So tell me," I whispered, "was your uncle really the first killer?" The wind moved through the park. Above us, birds crossed the moonlit sky, small and silent, like torn pieces of memory still trying to find their way home. And for the first time in 20 years, Inspector Samuel looked truly afraid. So this happened on a Sunday night. My girlfriend and I had gone out to dinner at Jay's, mostly because we wanted to sit outside, enjoy the patio, and just have a quiet evening together. But as soon as we were getting into the car, I noticed she had brought along our ghost hunting backpack. And when I saw that, I knew exactly what kind of night it was going to be. Over dinner, we started talking about where we should go afterward. We both felt like there was still something unfinished around St. Augustine's School and the old church nearby. So after we ate, we ended up back on 6th Avenue, near those hidden steps by the abandoned church. We set out the EMF readers and a couple of cat balls just to see if anything would respond. We introduced ourselves again, made it clear we meant no harm, and pretty quickly the EMF reader started lighting up. Yellow, then orange. It felt like something was actually listening. We asked if whoever was there wanted to speak through the spirit box, and the EMF flashed orange, almost like a yes. Then my girlfriend asked if the spirit had been connected to the Catholic Church, and through the spirit box, we heard a clear, unmistakable yes. We got another response after that, but then the energy started fading, so we thanked whoever was there, set our boundaries, and moved on. After that, we walked through Armory Park with the spirit box and EMF reader still running. My girlfriend wanted to pass by what we call the cat house, because there's usually this one cat there that she likes. That night, there was just one curled up on the porch swing, tucked away from the light rain. We kept walking our usual route, but nothing was really happening. The readings were quiet. I was already thinking we might just turn the corner and head back. Then I looked behind me and realized my girlfriend had stopped. She was standing at this front gate, and I immediately recognized the place. It was the same house she had told me about before, the one where she said she always felt a strong pull. We had tried checking it out a few nights earlier, but there were power lines and electrical boxes nearby, so the EMF readings had been too messy to trust. But this time was different. She leaned toward the gate with the EMF reader pointed straight at the house, and it started lighting up green. Then she said, very calmly, "I know you're here." She looked at me and said, "We have to go in." Then she opened the gate and said, "You want me to come in, don't you?" The EMF reader turned orange. She kept going. She said, "You've been wanting me to come in and talk to you." And right then, I heard what sounded like a little girl shriek. It was quick, but it went straight through me. I looked toward the front door, and for a second, I saw something. The only way I can describe it is a small gray and white shape, almost like a child-sized silhouette. It blended into the darkness, and then it was gone. I let my girlfriend lead. As soon as she stepped onto the stairs leading up to the brick porch, everything felt darker. Not just dim, heavy, like the whole place had swallowed the light around us. We checked the area first to make sure no one was hiding there. Then I sat on the ledge and she sat on the stairs with the EMF reader still in her hand. It kept bouncing between green and orange. She started speaking gently, like she was talking to someone scared. She said, "I felt like I was supposed to come here. I felt like I needed to connect with you." Then she started asking questions. "Are you a girl?" The EMF hit yellow. Then she asked, "Are you an older woman?" This time it jumped from orange to red. My girlfriend was locked in. She really felt like something was there with her, answering, but I was starting to feel terrible. Out of nowhere, I got nauseous. My head started pounding, almost like a migraine was coming on. I felt like I might throw up, but I didn't want to interrupt what was happening. Then my girlfriend got chills. She asked, "Are you behind me?" She stood up and turned toward the door, and immediately she said, "Oh my God, you're right there." She saw a round, grayish orb near the doorway, and then it vanished. She looked back at me and could tell I wasn't okay. She asked if I was all right, and I told her I felt sick, but I wanted her to keep going. She asked a few more questions, trying to figure out if the spirit was a mother, or maybe a sibling, or a child. The EMF hovered around green and yellow. Then I noticed a couple walking past the house, so I quietly warned her. She stopped talking and waited until they were gone. After that, she decided to close the conversation. She thanked whoever was there, told them we meant no harm, and set firm boundaries before leaving. By then, I was gagging. I honestly felt like I was about to vomit. We got out of there and made it back to the car. She knew I wasn't doing well, so we didn't talk much right away. When we got home, I took some medicine, showered, and we ordered food. Once I felt a little more grounded, we finally sat down to review the recordings. And that's when things got even stranger. At the beginning of the interaction at the house, while my girlfriend was speaking to whatever was there, we heard a child's voice on the recording. Clear as day. It said, "Mommy?" We also caught the little girl's shriek I had heard earlier. There were a couple of other responses too, short ones that sounded like, "Yeah," but we're still going through those. After that, we had to stop for the night, because whatever happened on that porch didn't feel like a random noise or a trick of the equipment. It felt like someone had been waiting for her to come in. Let me tell you a story I've always found both strange and fascinating. In old Thai folklore, people spoke of a creature called the Sua Sameng, a were-tiger, and there were said to be two kinds. The first was a real tiger of the forest, one that had grown old, cunning, and dangerous. After taking many human lives, people believed a dark spirit could enter it, giving it an almost human awareness. But the second kind was even more unsettling. This was not a tiger becoming something more human. It was a human being becoming a tiger. According to old beliefs, a person who studied forbidden magic could learn the art of changing form. With the right spell, the right ritual, or even a sacred oil, he could turn his body into that of a tiger and roam the deep forest as something no longer fully man. Now, this was not only a village tale whispered beside cooking fires. One account was connected to the royal journey of King Chulalongkorn during his visit to Chanthaburi in 1876. At that time, Chanthaburi was surrounded by thick, shadowy forest. Wild animals were everywhere: deer, elephants, and especially tigers. There were so many tigers that the governor had the constant duty of protecting villagers from attacks. And these were not distant threats. People said tigers sometimes came right into homes and dragged people away. The fear became so heavy that villagers were afraid to work, travel, or even move about freely. So the governor gathered skilled forest men and gave them firearms. Others built tiger traps. A serious hunt began, and many tigers were killed or driven far back into the wilderness. For a little while, people could breathe again. But then another fear rose up. Rumors spread that a Sua Sameng, a were-tiger, had appeared in the district. The story said that in the Khmer lands, there had been a master of occult magic who made a special oil of transformation. 3 of his students secretly used it on themselves and changed into tiger form. They wandered into Chanthaburi, and one of them became especially savage, killing several people in nearby areas. The master followed after them and warned the villagers. He told them that if they met one of these tiger men, they should strike it with a carrying pole or cover its footprints with a coconut shell. That, he said, might force it back into human form. But there was one terrible condition. If the tiger had already tasted human flesh, then it could no longer return. Something inside it had crossed a line. The man was lost, and only the beast remained. Now, even the king himself seemed unsure whether these stories were true. He recorded them, but you can feel a little skepticism in his words, almost as if he was saying, "This is what people believe, but who can say what really happened?" And there was another story from Satahip. The king once sent soldiers to fetch fresh water from a pond a short distance inland. Local people warned them not to go because a were-tiger had been seen nearby. They said a monk, who was supposedly the creature's master, had followed it through the night and was sitting beneath a sugar palm near the pond, waiting for a chance to turn his student back into a man. The soldiers were frightened enough to return and report what they had heard. The king wanted to see this monk for himself, but it was already late. By morning, the monk had vanished. And as for whether the tiger had eaten him or not, no one could say. That is what makes these old stories so haunting to me. They stand right at the edge between history and legend. There are royal records, real places, real fears, And yet at the center of it all is something wild and impossible. Maybe the were-tiger was only a way for people to explain the terror of man-eating tigers. Or maybe, in those deep forests of Chantaburi, people truly believed that some men could surrender themselves to darkness and walk the earth in another skin. Either way, the story of the Sua Sameng still lingers, half in the jungle, half in the human heart. I was about 6 years old when this happened. I'm in my 30s now, and even after all this time, I can still picture it so clearly. My mom had been taken into the local hospital because she was unwell, and she ended up staying there for a few days. On one of those visits, my uncle drove my dad, my grandmother, and me to see her. When we got there, visiting hours hadn't started yet, so my dad went off to get us something to eat. My gran stayed with me in the waiting area. That's where we met him. There was an older man sitting nearby, with a pair of crutches resting against the bench beside him. He was warm, funny, and easy to talk to. Even as a little kid, I remember liking him straight away. My gran seemed to like him too. She spoke with him for a while, really properly spoke with him, the way adults do when they somehow fall into a conversation that feels like it was waiting for them. He told us he was there visiting his wife. The thing I remember most, apart from how kind he seemed, was that every so often he would reach for his crutches and force himself up. It clearly hurt him. You could see it in his face and in the way his body moved. But still, every 10 minutes or so, he made himself stand and shuffle around a little, as though he had to keep moving. The next day we went back to the hospital. I ended up in the same waiting area again, sitting in almost the exact same place, with my gran beside me. And the old man was there again. But this time, everything was different. He wasn't sitting down. He was standing, propped on his crutches, but he didn't seem to be in pain anymore. There was no strain in him, no discomfort. And around him was this beautiful golden light. I don't mean a little glow from a window or a reflection from the floor. I mean he looked as if he was wrapped in it. It stretched around him, soft and bright, almost like a shining outline. It made him look peaceful, almost regal. And he was staring right at me. I remember asking him, completely randomly, whether he had a Sega Mega Drive. I was 6, so that felt like a perfectly normal thing to ask an old man in a hospital waiting room. My gran didn't look at him. She didn't answer him. She just looked at me and said something like, "Your game? No, love, we couldn't bring that with us. This is the hospital." Her voice was strange, flat, almost sharp. Not cruel exactly, but colder than she usually was with me. The old man spoke to her then. I can't remember the exact words, only that he was trying to make conversation. She ignored him completely. That confused me more than anything. The day before, she had been happily chatting away to him. Now she was acting like he wasn't there at all. I looked at her, waiting for her to acknowledge him, waiting for her to laugh or answer or say something that proved we were all seeing the same thing. But she didn't. He just stood there, leaning on his crutches, looking almost hurt by it. Not angry, just sad. Like being ignored genuinely upset him. Then my dad came back with food, and my gran spoke to him normally. She spoke to me normally. She spoke to a member of hospital staff. Everything around us carried on exactly as it should have. Except for the man. When it was time to go up to my mom's room, we walked away from him as if he had never been standing there at all. I kept looking back. He watched me the whole time as I was being led away. He looked worried, deeply worried, and that golden light around him stayed there, soft and bright, like silk catching the sun. At the time, It felt as though he was watching someone precious leave him behind, like he was losing one of his own. I still think about that look. I replay it in my head more often than I'd like to admit. The following day, we visited my mom again, but I didn't see him. And for some reason, I never brought it up. Not to my dad, not to my mom, not to my gran. At least, I have no memory of ever mentioning it. Not until years later. About 13 or 14 years after it happened, my gran was very unwell with advanced vascular dementia. Most conversations with her had become difficult. She would drift in and out, and it was rare to get much connection from her. Still, I used to sit with her and talk, trying to reach whatever part of her I could. One day, I told her about the hospital. I told her about being little, about waiting to visit my mom, about the old man with the crutches. I told her how he had been friendly the first day, and how the next day he had been standing there glowing gold, while she acted like she couldn't see him. And then she changed. She locked eyes with me, which, by that point, almost never happened. Her attention was suddenly clear in a way I hadn't seen for a long time. And she said, "That Taffy had bad legs, but once he got talking, he was hard to get rid of." That was all. Later, I found out his name was Thomas Taffy Wilkins. He had been a local acquaintance of my gran's. He died the same night my mom was admitted to hospital. The same night we first met him. He had gone home after visiting his wife, had a bad fall, and died there. His wife remained on the same ward as my mother for the next few days. And all these years later, I still don't know what I saw in that waiting room. I see this kind of thing online all the time. Someone grabs a camera, a flashlight, maybe one of those little blinking gadgets, and heads off to investigate the haunted, abandoned place in town. An old school, a closed hospital, a burned-out house, a factory that hasn't made anything but dust in 30 years. Where I grew up, the spot was an old train station. It used to be a big deal for local ghost hunters. People posted pictures and videos all over the forums, claiming they'd caught shadow figures, ghost children, whispers from the dark, all of that. And I get why the place had a reputation. It was huge, echoey, half-rotted, and sitting in one of the roughest parts of town. The kind of building that already feels like it's holding its breath before you even step inside. But honestly, a lot of those shadow people probably weren't ghosts at all. They were probably people with nowhere else to sleep. And I'm not saying that to mock anyone who believes in ghosts. That's not really the point. I'm also not here to judge people who are unhoused. They're human beings. Everyone deserves a safe, quiet place to rest. Just imagine it for a second. You've lost your home. You're exhausted, cold, maybe scared. And you find shelter in this old train station because it's the only place you can get out of the wind for a while. You finally find a corner where you might be able to close your eyes. Then, out of nowhere, some guy bursts in with a flashlight bright enough to peel paint off the walls, a camera in your face, and a bunch of noisy equipment. He starts yelling, "Is anyone here? Can you tell me your name? How did you die?" And you're just lying there thinking, "I'm not dead. I'm trying to sleep." Then the light swings toward you, and of course you get up and try to move away. Anyone would. But now he sees your shadow on the wall and thinks he's caught evidence of a spirit. So he either starts chasing you, screaming, or runs away screaming, and the whole thing ends up online. Meanwhile, you've had to leave the only shelter you had for the night. Or you spend hours hiding from people who came there for entertainment and left thinking they had a paranormal experience. And now think about this part. A lot of people experiencing homelessness are young. Some are teenagers. Some are children. So picture being a kid with nowhere safe to go, curled up in some freezing old building, and then a grown adult comes stomping through the dark, shouting questions at the dead, shining lights around, and maybe chasing after you because he thinks you're a ghost. That's not spooky. That's heartbreaking. So I really think we should leave abandoned places alone. Ghost hunt in places where people live, work, visit, or have actually agreed to let that happen. Places with permission. Places with rules. Places where you aren't accidentally terrifying someone who already has enough to survive. And funny enough, once that old train station was cleaned up and turned into a farmer's market, the ghost evidence almost disappeared. The shadow figures stopped showing up. The ghost children vanished, which probably says more than people want to admit. And honestly, even if it had been ghosts the whole time, maybe the same rule still applies. If something is hiding in an abandoned place, ghost or not, maybe it just wants to be left alone. Hey there. I want to share a story that's really close to my heart. Something about why my grandparents always warned me to stay out of the attic. I grew up on a quiet farm, raised by my grandparents after my parents passed away in a tragic car accident. Life was simple. No TV, just me outside helping with chores, feeding animals, and tending crops. My grandparents sold what we grew and raised at the local market about half an hour away. They were gentle, loving folks who let me roam and explore freely, even giving me a phone when I turned 13. But there was one rule they never bent. Never, ever go into the attic. It was right above my bedroom, but I only caught a glimpse once when Grandpa went up there. It was dark and empty, or so I thought. One night when I was 13, I was just about to fall asleep when I heard a soft groan from above. It was faint, like bumping your foot on a chair. Then, a quiet cry, like a child's whimper. My heart raced. I told my grandparents the next morning, and they said it was just them bumping into things. I didn't fully believe it, so that night I stayed up, waiting. Around 1 a.m., I heard it again, a low, painful groan turning into a man's cry. Frozen with fear, I eventually got up and shone my phone light toward the attic door. I grabbed a chair to reach the attic pull-down ladder, careful not to make noise. As I climbed up, a terrible smell hit me, a mix of skunk and something harsh. Inside, I found dusty boxes and old family portraits, including one of my mom, pregnant with me, and my dad. Then, a desperate groan came from a corner. My light revealed 2 cages covered with cloth. When I pulled it off, my blood ran cold. 2 creatures with burned, blackened skin, glowing red eyes, and no faces stared back at me. They screamed and thrashed violently. My grandparents appeared and sprayed them with a calming spray, explaining in a shaky voice that these were my parents. They told me a story I could hardly believe. After my parents died, they made a deal with a mysterious man who promised to bring them back. At first, they seemed normal, but soon they turned aggressive, animalistic, and dangerous. My grandparents tried to contain them, trapping them in those cages for years. They warned me to never go near the attic because my parents-turned creatures might get hungry if they saw me. Suddenly, the cages broke. My grandparents told me to run while they held them off. I fled, heart pounding, escaping to the farmhouse nearby. I hid behind a haystack, covering myself in mud to mask my scent as the creatures sniffed around, then finally left. The next day, I found the house in ruins and, heartbreakingly, the remains of my grandparents upstairs. I called the police, telling them a wild animal was responsible, because who would believe the truth? I moved away afterward, but I still carry that night with me. Recently, hearing about a child's terrible fate in the woods made me realize I had to share this. A warning to listen to those who protect you. Curiosity can lead to danger beyond imagination. The world holds darkness, and sometimes the monsters are closer than you think. Please, trust your loved ones when they say stay away. Hey, I want to share something personal with you. Something that's haunted me for years. It's about the woods near where I grew up and the terrifying presence that lives there. I hope by telling you this, it'll serve as a warning, because what I experienced was very real and very dangerous. So, I'm Liam. When I was a kid, my dad left us, and my mom decided to leave the city behind to start fresh. We moved to this tiny cabin deep in the Wisconsin woods when I was about 10. At first, I really hated it. Those woods? They scared me to death. Every time I looked out the window, I'd get this chill, like something was watching me from the shadows between the trees. It wasn't just a feeling. It was this deep, bone-chilling presence that never left me, not even as I got older. Walking to school through those endless, towering trees was the worst. I'd sense eyes tracking me from above, and it made me feel small and vulnerable. Funny thing is, my mom felt the exact opposite. She loved the woods. She'd take long walks, paint the trees, and always told me she felt safe and protected there. I never understood that. To me, it was the opposite. The woods were a place of dread. One night, I saw something. A huge silhouette with long arms, hunched, staring right at me from the darkness. I froze, but when my mom came in, it vanished. I tried telling her, but she just brushed it off, saying the woods were our shield from the bad in the world. I wanted to believe her, but I knew what I saw. Then, one morning on the walk to school, I heard snapping branches behind me. I didn't dare look back at first, but when the sound came again, I bolted. Fast footsteps chased me, and I ran until I burst out of the woods, my heart pounding. I told my best friend Jake, who lived nearby and shared my fear. He even admitted he'd seen something too. We tried walking home slowly together, hoping that if we stayed calm, the thing wouldn't chase us. But the snapping sounds followed, closer and louder, until we sprinted to my cabin, locking the door behind us. That night, I looked out my window again and saw it closer. This grotesque creature with a hunched back, long clawed fingers, no eyes, but somehow its gaze locked onto me. It wasn't human, wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. It was a predator, and I was its prey. The next day, the worst happened. Jake disappeared. His parents found his room empty. I was terrified, convinced the creature had taken him. I begged my mom to believe me, but she just said he might have run away, not understanding the danger lurking just beyond our cabin. At school, everyone was buzzing with rumors. Some thought Jake ran off, others whispered darker things. I wanted to scream the truth, but no one would listen. I felt alone, scared, and desperate. That night, I made a plan. I packed a flashlight, extra batteries, water, and pepper spray my mom gave me, and waited until she went to bed. Then, I slipped out into the woods to find Jake. The forest was eerily silent. No crickets, no owls, just darkness. When my flashlight died, panic set in. I scrambled for batteries, and when I turned it back on, I saw it. The creature, right in front of me. Its skin was raw muscle, its mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, no eyes but a terrible grin. It grabbed me by the head and dragged me into a dark cave I'd never seen before. I was hung upside down, ropes binding my ankles. There, I saw Jake's orange shirt on the ground. The creature spoke in a deep, gruff voice, calling me food, telling me it had been watching me and that Jake had tasted wonderful. I asked what it was. It said it was an ancient being, almost extinct, ruling the woods for centuries, preying on anything that dared enter. It only hunted kids because they tasted the best. It had no eyes but tracked scent like a predator. Just as it was about to eat me, I managed to spray it with pepper spray. It shrieked and dropped me. I ran, heart pounding, until I burst out of the cave into the daylight. I ran straight home, where my mom was waiting, tears in her eyes. We moved away soon after, back to the city, to my aunt's place. Even now, I think about Jake and that creature. I tried telling my mom, but she never believed me. What terrifies me most is knowing there are still more of those things out there, lurking in the woods, waiting. So, please, if you're ever near a dark forest, especially at night, be careful. Listen to the silence. Watch the shadows. They're watching too, and they're hungry. Hey there. I want to share something that's been weighing on my heart for a long time. It's a story about how life can change in the blink of an eye, and how sometimes the things we love the most can turn into nightmares. So, I've been a drinker for as long as I can remember. It started back in high school when my buddy Marco handed me a beer at a party during freshman year. From that moment, I was hooked. I won't lie, it was rough. Flunked almost all my classes, barely scraped by graduation. My days were filled with parties and nights of drinking, thinking I was invincible, like nothing could touch me. After high school, I bounced around jobs, getting fired for showing up drunk or missing work because of hangovers. Eventually, I gave up trying to hold down a job and just holed up in my parents' basement, playing video games and drowning in beer. My parents were tough on me, saying things like, "Ethan, you're going to ruin yourself if you keep this up," or "Get your act together." I never listened. I felt hopeless, like I was stuck in a cycle I couldn't break. One day, while grabbing beer at the grocery store, I met someone who changed everything. I reached for a pack of Corona, and this woman, about my age, with long dark hair and bright green eyes, grabbed for the same pack. Her name was Candace. We started talking, and I learned she was going through her own struggles. A recent breakup, tough job as a waitress, just trying to get by. We clicked instantly. That night, we grabbed dinner and talked about everything from our messed up pasts to our hopes for the future. She gave me her number, telling me to call any time. Over the next months, we grew closer, dated, and eventually, I asked her to marry me. I bought her a gold ring with a sparkling diamond and surprised her by hiding it in the cake at dinner. Her face lit up with joy and tears. I'll never forget that moment. Candace became my rock. She helped me get a bartending job where she worked, and we supported each other to quit drinking. Life finally felt good, stable, hopeful. Then came the news that she was pregnant. We were over the moon, preparing a pink nursery for our baby girl, whom we planned to name Brielle. But as the due date neared, Candace got sick, really sick. She was throwing up blood, passing out, and I was terrified. The day she went into labor, it was chaos. At the hospital, I waited, praying even though I'm not a religious man. Then a doctor came out and told me my worst nightmare. Candace didn't make it, and our baby was stillborn. I was shattered. The woman who saved me, who loved me, was gone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I remember her last words to me before the hospital. "I love you." Those words echoed in my mind as I drove home, stopped at the store where we met, and bought pack after pack of beer. I drank like I never had before, trying to drown the pain. That night, after drinking until I passed out, I woke up to whispers calling my name. I found myself back at the hospital, alone in a dark hallway. Then I heard Candace's voice, telling me she was okay and to come see our child. I ran to a room where she held our baby, but the sight was horrifying. Our daughter was covered in blood, her eyes missing. Candace's face was grotesquely distorted, her skin rotten and eyes black. She begged me to hold our daughter, but I ran away, terrified. The creature that looked like Candace chased me, pleading for me to complete our family. I was trapped, desperate to escape. Then everything went dark. The voices kept calling my name, louder and louder, until silence. I woke up in an ambulance, paramedics working frantically to save me. One of them, a woman with dark hair, reminded me of Candace. I whispered to her, promising I was coming back, that I wouldn't leave her again. I survived, but I was broken. I was sent to rehab, and I still hear those whispers at night, see that horrifying creature in reflections. It's like the shadows of that night never left me. Now, there's another story I want to warn you about. The tale of a boy named Greg and a Thomas the Tank Engine episode called Sir Topham Hatt's Day Off. Greg loved Thomas, even when others mocked him. One day, he found an old VHS tape with that title. Despite warnings from his father, he watched it and saw something terrifying. The episode showed the beloved trains being shot by Sir Topham Hatt, who had bloodshot red eyes and a sinister smile. The images haunted Greg, giving him nightmares for years. His therapist tried to help, giving him a red stress ball to squeeze whenever the memories returned. Eventually, he even passed a test of recovery when handed a Thomas toy. But the horror didn't end. That same day, news broke of a 10-year-old girl found dead with the same tape nearby. Greg's world shattered again, the terror of that cursed episode still very real. So, if you ever come across a Thomas the Tank Engine episode called Sir Topham Hatt's Day Off, please, don't watch it. Some things are better left forgotten. Thanks for listening. I hope sharing this helps someone out there feel less alone in their struggles. And remember, sometimes the darkest nights can lead to the brightest dawns, if you let them. Hey, I want to share something really personal with you. Something that's been with me for a long time now. I'm Henry, and my story starts way back in high school. I was just a regular kid, until I got my first taste of alcohol at a party, thanks to my buddy Mark. From that point on, drinking became my escape, my constant companion. I won't lie, it messed me up pretty bad. Sleepless nights, nightmares, flunked classes, you name it. Somehow, I barely graduated. After high school, life didn't get easier. I bounced from job to job, losing them because of my drinking. My parents? They were at their wits' end with me. They'd say things like, "Henry, if you keep this up, you're going to ruin your life." Or, "Get your act together and find a job." But I just shut them out. I felt hopeless, like I was stuck in a dark tunnel with no way out. Then, one day at the grocery store, of all places, I met Candace. I was reaching for a pack of beer, and she grabbed the same one. We started talking, and, honestly, I felt like I could breathe again. She was going through her own struggles. Recent breakup, tough job as a waitress, barely making rent. We connected over our shared pain, and slowly, things started to change. We went from strangers to friends, then to dating, and eventually, I asked her to marry me. I remember hiding the ring in the cake at our dinner, and when she found it, her tears and joy made me feel like I had a new purpose. Candace was my rock. She helped me get a bartending job, supported me when my parents distanced themselves, and together, we fought our addictions. Life was finally looking up. We had a home, steady jobs, and then came the best news. We were expecting a baby girl. We painted her nursery pink, got a cute crib, and named her Brianna, after one of Candace's favorite singers. But as the due date approached, things took a turn for the worse. Candace got really sick, throwing up blood, fainting. I was terrified for both of them. The delivery was a nightmare. Candace passed away during labor, and our baby girl was stillborn. I remember the doctor's words like a punch to the gut, and the world just shattered around me. I was broken, lost, drowning in grief. That night, I found myself back at the grocery store, buying pack after pack of beer. I hadn't touched alcohol in almost 2 years, but pain made me forget everything. I drank until I blacked out. Then, the strange things started. I woke up in a hospital hallway, empty and dimly lit. I heard Candace's voice, telling me she was okay and to come see our daughter. I followed it to a room where she held our baby, but the baby's eyes were missing, her body covered in blood. Candace looked horrifying, her face twisted and decayed. She urged me to hold our child, but I was terrified and ran away. As I fled, Candace's figure chased me, begging me not to leave them, calling me to complete our family. I was paralyzed with fear, trapped in this nightmare until everything went black. Then, I woke up in an ambulance, paramedics working frantically to save me. One of them even resembled Candace, which made everything feel surreal. I was lucky to be alive, but the damage was severe. My lungs were ruined, and I couldn't breathe or speak for weeks. Now, I'm in rehab, trying to piece my life back together. But those whispers, they never leave me. At night, I still hear my name being called softly, haunting me. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I feel like that creature is just behind me, waiting. It's a reminder of the darkness I've faced, but I'm holding on, telling myself I won't let it win. Hey, I want to share a story with you. Something that's been on my mind for a long time. It's about second chances, strange encounters, and a son unlike any other. I'm not one for drama, just a regular guy named Dave. I'm in my mid-30s, working construction, married to my wife Barbara, and we've had our struggles, especially when it came to having a child. Barbara and I wanted a baby so badly, but it just never happened. Watching friends start families while we faced disappointment was tough. Barbara held on to hope longer than I did, but after a while, we decided to try adoption. On the way to the adoption center, Barbara was quiet, tears quietly falling. Then, at the clinic, we met a man named Kyle. He called himself Lazarus. Tall, with striking green eyes, he seemed to know more about us than he should. He told us he was a servant of a higher power, not the God we knew, but someone else. He offered to help us have a child of our own, and despite my doubts, Barbara accepted a strange purple potion from him. She drank it, collapsed, but after some rest, the doctors confirmed she was pregnant. It was a miracle, but one wrapped in mystery. When our son was born, Lazarus showed up again, handing us a list of rules we had to follow. Rules that seemed bizarre and frightening, calling our son only by the name Lazarus, never looking at him while he ate, keeping him isolated from other kids, making sure he was in bed by 10 p.m., and some even darker, like keeping him chained outside on his 15th birthday. We followed the rules out of fear and hope, but as Lazarus grew, he changed. His mood darkened, he screamed at night, and one time Barbara saw his eyes glow yellow. The things we feared seemed real. On his 15th birthday, we chained him in the shed like the rules said, but the chain broke. That night, a creature, not quite our son, prowled the house, growling and searching. We hid, terrified, as the creature's glowing yellow eyes searched for us. The house was wrecked by morning, and Lazarus was gone. Then the man, Lazarus, returned, warning us that by breaking the rules, we unleashed a monster. We knew what had to be done, but it broke our hearts. One night, when Lazarus came back, he seemed normal at first, but his eyes betrayed him, glowing yellow. Before we could react, he attacked Barbara. I barely escaped to the shed, locking the door behind me as the creature tried to break in. I held my shotgun, tears streaming down, knowing the fight ahead was terrifying. This story isn't just about horror or monsters. It's about choices, consequences, and the things we do for those we love. I wish I could say it ended differently, but sometimes the price of a miracle is higher than we expect. Thanks for listening to my story. Hey, I want to share with you a story that's honestly changed how I see things forever. It all started when I was 16, just a regular high school girl named Emma. I wasn't really into all that internet mystery stuff, especially the dark web. Honestly, I had way better things to do, like hanging out with my friends or getting my nails done. But one day at school, my friend Kelly told me about her boyfriend getting dared to go on the dark web. She said, "There's some really creepy stuff there. Videos of cults, sacrifices, super disturbing." And I was like, why would anyone want to see that? Gross. Kelly agreed, and we didn't think much more of it. Except at lunch, everyone was buzzing about Robbie's dare and how maybe one of us should try it. I stayed quiet, not wanting any part of it. I knew the dark web had awful stuff, violent things, illegal things, and I was not about that life. Then my other friend, Christine, jokingly said, "Hey, maybe Emma should do it." I immediately said no. But then my friends started chanting, "Do it, do it, do it." I was so embarrassed, but eventually I just gave in and shouted, "Fine, I'll do it." They cheered, and Kelly said, "Okay, but you have to FaceTime me while you're on, and Robbie will send you a link." I was mad, but whatever. I figured I'd just glance and get it over with. That night, Robbie texted me a link and said, "Good luck." I got goosebumps, but I wasn't about to chicken out. I FaceTimed Kelly as I opened the link, grumbling, "This is so stupid. Can't believe I'm doing this." She laughed and said, "You just have to click on one site. Then we'll all have a good laugh." The page loaded, a black screen with a skull and a bunch of red links. I clicked on the third link and found an auction site. At first, it didn't seem too bad, but then I saw female names with links. I clicked a random one and saw a blurry photo of a girl walking home from school. She looked about my age, brown hair, green eyes. The description said, "Tiffany, 16, high school, Riverside. Parents, Helen and Mark. Hair, brown. Eyes, green. Body, petite." And then a price, $20,000. My heart dropped. "What is this?" I whispered to Kelly. "It's like they're selling girls," I said, voice shaking. Kelly freaked and told me to call the police. I was about to hang up to dial 911 when I saw a name at the top of the list, Emma Morgan. My breath caught. I clicked on it, and there I was, a photo of me walking home. The description was detailed and creepy, like they knew everything. My age, my school, my parents, even my body. The price was $60,000. I screamed, tears streaming. I couldn't hear Kelly anymore. I hung up and ran to my parents' room. They came running out when they heard me crying. I told them everything. They checked the website, called the police, but the site was untraceable. They promised to have an officer nearby just in case. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that auction haunted me. How did they know all that? Were they watching me? The next day, my friends apologized and suggested we go shopping to take my mind off it. I agreed, but when I asked Kelly to walk home with me, she said her mom was picking her up. My parents were stuck at work, so I had to walk home alone. I told myself, "It's just 15 minutes. It's afternoon. People are around." But then, I noticed a man behind me, walking fast. I sped up, but he matched my pace. Panic set in, and I ran. Just as I reached my door, fumbling for keys, I felt a sharp prick in my shoulder, and everything went black. When I woke, I was in a dark room, chained to the floor, a computer glowing in front of me. On the screen, a Google Meet with 50 people watching. I screamed, begged for help. Then, a man stepped out of the shadows. Black jeans, black hoodie, face hidden. He asked, "How much?" The crowd started shouting prices. 60,000, 80,000, 90,000. Then, 115,000. The man said, "Going once, going twice, sold." 2 days later, Kelly was holding a missing person poster. My poster. Tears in her eyes, she looked at my smiling photo. Blonde hair shining, brown eyes sparkling. "Emma, I'm so sorry," she whispered. And that's how a stupid dare on the dark web changed my life forever. Hey, I want to share something that's been on my mind for a while. So, I've been seeing my girlfriend Jame for about 2 months, and I've been over at her place quite a bit. But there was this one night that just felt different. You know how it is when you're a teenager. Anything to spend time with your girl, especially when her parents aren't around. But at Jame's house, nighttime was always a little weird. Like, there was this vibe that something wasn't quite right. What really got to me was going upstairs to the bathroom at night. Every time, it felt like someone was watching me, or maybe just following me closely. It was unsettling. Jame's mom was cool with me being there late, and when I knocked, she just let me in with that knowing smile and a wink. She told me she was heading out to dinner with her fiancé, and that I had the run of the house until Jame got back. She joked, "Just don't steal anything," and then left. I settled in the living room, streaming some Seinfeld to keep my mind off things. But when nature called, I had to face those stairs. The dark stairwell freaked me out. I asked Jame once why the lights in the entryway and stairs never worked for long. She said they'd only stay on for a day or so, and no one knew why. That just made me even more uneasy. So I bolted up the stairs, did my business, and was about to head back down when I heard it. Her dog, Max, was growling at something down the hall. But it didn't sound like Max. He's a tiny Pomeranian. No, this was a deep, angry growl, like a Rottweiler or something way bigger. I shouted, "Max, it's just me," and nearly tripped going down the steps. Max usually sleeps upstairs at this hour, so this growling was off. Then I heard the car door slam outside. Jame was home. I never told her how freaked out I was by the house, but that night I rented the movie Sinister just to match the spooky mood. I was waiting for her to come in before pressing play. She walked in, the back of her facing me as she shut the door, and I was about to say, "Babe, your dog is acting really weird." But then she turned around, and I froze. The hair on my arm stood up. She was holding Max. She said she'd taken him to her cousin's place to play with the kids. I stammered, "Oh, I didn't realize Max was with you." She smiled and asked, "So what was it you wanted to say about him?" I just told her it was nothing and suggested we watch TV. After that, I avoided those stairs completely. But even then, I kept catching shadows moving out of the corner of my eye near the front door. Every time I looked, it stopped. Since then, Jame started coming over to my place more often. At first, I asked her to, but eventually, it was her idea. Max passed away peacefully in his sleep at 13 years old, and since that day, Jame's told me something that still sends chills down my spine. She said, "Ever since I was little, I thought it was Max growling outside the bathroom at night. But now that he's gone, the growling hasn't stopped. It's coming from my closet." want to tell you about this really weird experience I had one night. It was around 2 a.m. and I was just chilling on the couch, flipping through channels to unwind. I landed on the tail end of a sitcom, kind of like a classic family comedy, and then the screen went black for a second before switching to Seinfeld. You know, that's actually my all-time favorite show. But this episode, something was seriously off. Usually, Seinfeld kicks off with Jerry doing his stand-up routine, right? But this time, Jerry was at the mic looking completely out of it. He looked pale, his words were slurred, and he kept nodding off. Then, out of nowhere, he grabbed the mic stand to steady himself and collapsed. There was blood coming from his nose, like a lot, but his eyes stayed shut. It was chilling. Then, a crew member hurried on stage, helped him up, and they took him off, with Jerry clutching his stomach like he was about to throw up. After that, the actual episode started, and I realized I had never seen this one before. I mean, I've watched every episode multiple times over the years, and Jerry never got taken off stage like that. I just kept thinking, why would they leave that in? What is going on here? The scene shifted to Jerry standing in his kitchen, but it wasn't the usual clean, familiar kitchen from the show. This was some dingy, run-down place, walls stained, dishes piled up everywhere, just a mess. Jerry looked awful. 2 black eyes, mouth hanging open, drool pooling on the floor, barely conscious. Then the buzzer rang, and without hesitation, he let whoever it was in. It was Elaine. But this wasn't the Elaine we know. She looked worse than Jerry. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her skin pale and gaunt, her face scarred with smudged makeup, hair wild and tangled. She came in and kept shaking Jerry, saying over and over, "Jer, wake up, wake up." But Jerry just kept mumbling, what?" and wiping his face, barely responding. I won't lie, it was haunting. This version of the show was like a twisted nightmare of the characters we thought we knew. It felt so real, but at the same time, completely surreal. It stuck with me ever since, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. Just thought I'd share this strange little piece of my night with you. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me recently. Something that's been on my mind a lot. So I was walking back from my new friend Haley's house late at night. Where I live now, it's pretty rural. Just 2 of the 5 families around here, including mine and Haley's, and our parents own a lot of land with gas wells scattered about. It's peaceful, and honestly, it feels good to walk alone at night without that constant worry I had back in the city. Anyway, I was making my way down this trail that only folks around here really know about, kind of carved out by us over time. Suddenly, I hear these crunching sounds, like someone running through the branches. It startled me, but I thought maybe it was my brother. He's older, and he and his friends love to scare me like that. They used to do it all the time when we lived in Chicago, so I figured it was just them messing around. But then I called my dad, and it was about 1:45 in the morning. He was pretty mad at first, probably because I was out so late. But then he told me my brother was actually in bed. He asked me exactly where I was. I told him I was coming back from Haley's place, and that's when he got really worried. He told me to run home as fast as I could. Turns out, he had just gotten a call from Haley's mom. Haley was missing, and so was her dad's pickaxe, the one I had actually seen leaning against their house when I left. Dad said Haley was a very sick girl, and kept telling me to hurry. He sounded scared. If he had known I was at her house, he would have come to get me right away. Now, thinking back, I remember when I was at Haley's, sitting in the bathroom, and she suddenly snuck in and hid in the bathtub behind the curtain. But she didn't jump out or scare me. Instead, she crawled after me to her room with this serious look on her face, not like she was joking. Then she suddenly went back to being her normal, fun self, and everything seemed fine. So I ran through the woods, dropping my purse as I went. My legs were burning, and I was scared out of my mind. I almost ran right into my dad, who was just beyond the backyard with a flashlight. He told me to run inside. I waited in the living room, biting my nails like crazy, until he came in and started locking all the doors. He told me we'd be okay, and I finally went to bed. But just about half an hour ago, I woke up to a strange noise outside my bedroom window. It was 3:13 a.m., and I was terrified to look. I imagined the worst, maybe seeing Haley's face out there. When I finally pulled back the curtain, there was nothing. Until I turned on my phone's flashlight. And then, right there on the window, written in dew formed by fingerprints, was a word, but it was spelled backwards. It said T-S-O-M-L-A. Flipping it around, it reads, almost. I don't know what it means. I just wish I hadn't become her friend. Hey, I want to share a story that's been in my mind for a while now. After my grandma passed away, I started spending weekends at my grandpa's new apartment to keep him company and help him through the loneliness. I usually crashed on the pull-out bed that folds out from the living room couch. One night, after turning off the TV, I was just about drifting off. There was this old wooden clock on the mantle, and the steady ticking always helped me relax and fall asleep. But that night was different. As I was dozing, I heard this noise coming from the kitchen, this shuffling sound. It immediately took me back to childhood memories, because I had a cousin who used to sleepwalk when she visited. I remember one night finding her standing in the bathroom closet, and ever since, that image has haunted me in nightmares. So hearing those footsteps stop once they reached the dining room carpet really freaked me out. I froze, gripping the covers so tight my palms felt sweaty. Then the footsteps stopped, but something even more unsettling started. The sound of something gliding across the carpet. It was like movers dragging a heavy piece of furniture through the living room. My heart was pounding, and I pulled the pillow over my ears, but I could still hear it. Then, right where my feet were at the end of the couch, the bed slumped down as if someone sat there, pressing down on the covers wrapped around my legs. I tried to kick and squirm free, but nothing budged. In desperation, I called out, "Grandma, I know you're here, but please leave me alone." Instead of stopping, it felt like whoever it was climbed up onto the couch, like they were about to straddle me. That's when I finally threw myself off and ran down the hallway, flipping on every light. But when I looked around, there was no one there. I left everything as it was, turned off the lights, and crawled into bed with my grandpa. He never even woke up. That night, I had the most terrifying nightmares. At one point, I woke up soaked in sweat from dreaming I was eating mealworms and maggots out of a bag of chips. I could taste it so vividly, but I was too scared to get up and rinse my mouth out. The next morning, Grandpa asked why I was in his bed. I told him everything. The noises, the feeling, the presence. He just looked down quietly. I suggested maybe it was Grandma checking on me, and that I might have been imagining things. But he shook his head firmly. He said, "Grandma passed away at Riverside Hospital," and my heart skipped a beat. So it couldn't have been her. I didn't ask you or your brother to stay here because I'm lonely or sad. I asked you to come because of that. I pressed him. "Are you sure it wasn't Grandma?" And his answer still chills me. "No, it wasn't. Whatever it is, it hates me and wants me gone." Grandpa passed away about a year later. My mom brought him to live with us after that strange experience. As he settled in, his mind started slipping because of Alzheimer's, and at night he would wander the halls. Sometimes, I'd hear that same shuffling sound. Other times, a gliding noise I never dared to investigate. During those nights, I often found our dog hiding under my bed. I wondered if whatever was there had followed Grandpa home, and even worse, if it took him when he died. I don't think it was human. And honestly, I'm still not sure what to make of it. Hey, I want to share a story from my old neighborhood about this street called Pinewood Drive. It intersected with my street just a few blocks away, and there was this eerie local legend everyone whispered about. Back in the early 80s, a 16-year-old girl named Selena was walking home from school during a storm when a drunk driver hit her. The accident was so severe that she died instantly. What made it even more heartbreaking was that she had just found out she was pregnant a week before. Some folks in town believed she was actually coming back from a clinic after an abortion, and that somehow that was the reason this tragedy struck her. The story goes that her spirit wanders the neighborhood, but only when it rains, because she died in a storm. Now, I know stories like these sound like ghost tales, but growing up, my friends and I were obsessed with trying to find Selena's ghost. Once I got my driver's license, we'd drive around Pinewood Drive, usually after a few drinks, hoping to catch a glimpse. One night, just as a light drizzle started, we spotted a girl in a bright red coat walking by the side of the road. No umbrella, which was a classic sign of Selena's trick. She'd make drivers stop to help her get out of the rain. We slowed down, even though Jeff and I were uneasy about it. Our friend Kyle sighed, it's just Jenny. We rolled down the window and called out, "Jenny Vanelli, need a ride?" To our relief, she smiled and said, "Yes, please." I moved over so she could hop in next to me, and after she thanked us, we started chatting about the ghost story, half joking about how ridiculous it all sounded. Then the rain started pouring hard. Jenny, who was usually super chatty, suddenly went quiet. That silence was so unlike her. You might think, oh no, you picked up the ghost instead of Jenny. But no, I looked right at her. Definitely Jenny. After a moment, she looked up and asked, "Do you know how Selena tricks people into giving her a ride?" Jeff nodded and said, "Yeah, she walks without an umbrella, and people feel sorry and stop for her." Then Jenny added, "Do you know the other way?" We waited. Her voice dropped into this eerie, shrill whisper. "She tricks them by looking like someone they know." Right then, the car screeched to a halt. I caught a glimpse of terror in Kyle's eyes through the rearview mirror, and Jenny's face, her mouth twisted into this evil cackle, revealing missing teeth and blood trickling down. For a second, I saw a horrifying, disfigured face staring right at me. We all jumped out screaming. Kyle's car ended up being towed. The next day at school, Jenny told us she'd been home all night. It's been over 2 decades now, but I still get uneasy when it rains. Oh, and when Kyle finally got his car back from impound, there was a pacifier sitting right there in the back seat. I've carried 2 memories for years, and even now, I still don't know what to do with them. I've tried telling myself it was stress, fear, sickness, or my mind filling in the blanks. But the truth is, I know what I saw. And some nights, when the dreams come back, it feels like those moments are still sitting beside me, waiting to be understood. The first thing happened a few years before 2021. I grew up in a planned industrial town, the kind of place built decades ago with help from the Soviet Union. A lot of the homes had been there since the late 1960s, and families still lived in them because the company controlled most of the city. My father worked there, so we had access to places most people didn't, or at least he knew about them. Near the old post office, there was this narrow road people sometimes talked about like it was a shortcut. But it was always guarded. No one was supposed to go in. When I asked my father about it, he said there was no such road, no hidden section, nothing like that. But one summer afternoon, around noon, I accidentally ended up there. It was blazing hot outside, the kind of heat that makes the air look bent. I was on my scooter, expecting the road to curve back toward the main street, but it didn't. It just kept going. The farther I went, the quieter everything became. The town behind me seemed to fade out, and suddenly I was in a place that felt completely wrong. There were broken signs, dry leaves everywhere, and an old board that looked like it once pointed towards some kind of library. That made no sense, because there was no ancient library anywhere in our city. I had checked records before. I knew the place I lived in. Then I saw a ruined house in the distance. It didn't look like the other houses around us. It had that older Russian style, heavy and strange, almost like it belonged to a different century. There was also a pond, cracked statues, and one statue that looked like a mother holding a child. Everything felt abandoned, but not empty. I remember wanting to leave immediately. I was scared in a way I couldn't explain. I kept driving, praying under my breath, trying to find an exit. Then I looked in my right mirror. There was a woman behind me, dressed in white, with something covering her head. For a second, I thought maybe she was just another person taking the same shortcut. I even thought about stopping to ask her how to get out. But then, she was gone. Not walking away, not turning a corner, just gone. Somehow, a road opened ahead, and I found my way out. I went home shaken and told my parents. They warned me not to take strange routes, but the part that still bothers me is this. When I went back later with friends, nothing was there. No ruined house, no pond, no statue, no old library sign. Nothing. It was like the road had swallowed itself. The second memory happened in 2021 when I was 16 and sick with COVID. My mother and I were both in the hospital. I was on oxygen and she was in serious condition. At first, I was in a general ward before they moved me to a private room, and that day was one of the worst days I can remember. 7 people died in that ward, one after another, every few hours. There were nurses, machines, panic, prayers, and that heavy silence that falls after someone is gone. But what I remember most clearly is the bird. I know how that sounds. I know people will say I was sick, exhausted, scared, maybe hallucinating. But the room was sealed. The windows weren't open. The air conditioning was running. There was no way a bird should have been inside. And no one else seemed to see it. It moved from bed to bed. Each time it stepped away from someone, that person died soon after. I watched it happen again and again. At one point, it circled my mother's bed, and I remember praying with everything I had that it wouldn't stop there. It didn't. It moved to another bed. That was the 7th one. After the 7th death, the bird disappeared. During that time, I kept having the same dream. I was in a white place where trains came and went. People got off. People got on. Some left and never came back. I kept trying to climb onto one of the trains, but someone always stopped me. Then I saw my grandfather board one. That night, I thought it was just another nightmare. The next morning, our relatives told us he had passed away while we were in the hospital. Later, my mother said she had dreamed of him too. In her dream, he told her he would take her place because he was old, and her children still needed her. She forgot many things from that year, and honestly, so did I. 2021 feels blurred at the edges, but that part stayed. My mother survived, even though she had been critically ill, and sometimes, I wonder if my grandfather gave something up for her. I don't know what these 2 incidents were. I don't know if they were connected. Maybe they were trauma. Maybe they were warnings. Maybe there are places and moments where the world opens a door it usually keeps locked. But I know this much. I didn't make it up. And even after all these years, I still find myself asking the same question. What did I see?